Good evening and welcome. Today we shall be reading Youjo Senki, The Saga of Tanya the Evil, Volume 3, The Finest Hour, Chapter 5, The Southern Campaign. However, before we begin with that, I have two brief notes that I would like to mention. I first wish to acknowledge the fact that this is being recorded on November 11th, 2018. The 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I and Remembrance Day in Canada. And that is indeed the fact of the matter. Today, 100 years ago, the Great War came to an end, and Germany succumbed to the pressure that it had been put under by both my own country of Canada and the Americans, the French, and everyone else. A very interesting and unforgettable moment in history that put us on the path to our present world order. Anyway, that's the first thing I wanted to make note of. The second, I just got back from my second hunting trip of the season. I was up near a little town called Cache Creek. Now, unfortunately, we didn't end up getting anything because, unbeknownst to us, there had been a fairly sizable forest fire up there quite recently that seemed to rip through and more or less killed off most of the wildlife and a good many of the trees. It was pretty much devoid of life up there. Temperature-wise, it sort of fluctuated between -5 and +5 degrees Celsius, more or less an average of about 0 to +2 Celsius. So, not too bad. I mean, given the time of year, we're getting in towards the end of the hunting season now. Winter's coming. But all told, it was kind of nice, I guess. I mean, drove up there, spent a little while looking around, didn't find anything much first day, found some tracks from some deer and some elk. No other sign, though, to speak of. And so we tried driving a couple 100 kilometers back down the road, tried a few other places, checked a few cut lots and some logging areas. Again, no luck, regrettably. I honestly think it's probably just too late in the season and probably was looking in the wrong areas. I mean, awfully close to Vancouver in relative terms compared to the rest of the province. It may well be shot out. In any case, as far as what I brought with me for this little trek, on the recommendation of one of my Iraqi subscribers who mentioned that he actually went hunting with one of his AKs a few months ago, I figured I'd bring along my Type 81, which is about as close as we can get here. So it would have done the job just fine, I think. And it was exceedingly light. I quite enjoyed carrying it along beside me. I love freedom. It is beautiful. In any case, we are definitely blessed in this great country. Now then, suffice it to say, that's basically summarizing the events of the past few days. So, with that out of the way, and nothing further to mention of note, we now begin Chapter 5, The Southern Campaign. We begin here with a quote. "The king lamented his victory. He had sacrificed too much for it, and if he achieved one more similar triumph, his army would be ruined." A note here from Pyrrhic Victory, which I can infer is probably an in-universe book of military history or something of that note. In context, in real life, I don't think it is anything. If it is, I will look it up and enclose appropriate notes in the video portion accompanying this audio track. Next here. September 22nd. Unified Year, 1925, the Southern Continent. "We'll take out all enemy artillery, Major von Degrichaff. What about your unit?" "Huh? Reconnect me at once." "Give me headquarters. We've got signal jamming, damn it. 1105, request a bypass. The improvised field command post is in an uproar over the signal interruption. On the southern front, where the fighting has rapidly escalated, everyone has lost their cool." Well, that's just how it was on the Rhine. It'd be strange if you were composed on the battlefield. And here is Tanya, Her days in the southern lands no different from her days in the west. She already knows to try patching through headquarters on the wired line when the wireless won't connect. She has experienced practically every type of combat communications problem possible in both trench and high maneuver warfare. She is versed in the countermeasures, so she doesn't panic at this degree of trouble. She promptly proceeds through the checklist of actions that need to be taken. The radio operator immediately opens a wireless line to headquarters. A wired line to headquarters. Their efficiency is praiseworthy. Despite the brief command chain disruption, they cope without hesitating. But after a brief exchange, their faces go pale. It's not jamming. There isn't any noise. We have clear connections with units in the area. The issue is mechanical trouble on the 44th's side. God damn it. She curses in her head because she knows what that would have meant on the Rhine lines. The same surely goes for anyone baptized on that front. Keep calling them. Shortwave is fine. Inspect our equipment one more time, just in case. Hurry! She wants to pin her hopes on a slim possibility, but she doesn't expect anything further from it. Sometimes it is better to be a pessimist and expect the worst on the battlefield rather than get your hopes up. Hope is important, yes, but if you rely on that morphine in battle, you'll be ruined in the long run. I suppose you could say it's going as expected. One of the radio operators promptly checks out the machine, but sure enough, it's fine. The machines are all operating normally. They insist that if everything here is fine, it must surely mean that the 44th Mage Battalion is having mechanical trouble. If that's true, then that's not good. This is a high maneuver battle in the Barbad Desert. If they can't contact the command post of Kampfgruppen 7, the vanguard of the left flank, it will cause more than confusion in the chain of command. What the fuck is going on? The officers are getting frustrated, but they have the self-control to not let it show on their faces. It's axiomatic that if officers get needlessly shaken in front of their soldiers, confusion will rapidly increase. Even the greenest officer, Second Lieutenant Grants, knows that. We've established contact, ma'am, on the shortwave. The passcode matches. For a moment, relief drifts through the improvised field command post. Tanya can't help but have a sober opinion about that. I guess the younger officers and less experienced guys can't help but think positively, eh? It's not easy for a logical, economically minded person to form the habit of expecting the worst either. It's even true in financial deals that aren't life or death. The logic of behavioral economics brilliantly reveals that when you apply it to bubbles and crises. I'm going to reread that sentence. It's even true in financial deals that aren't life or death. The logic of behavioral economics brilliantly reveals that when you apply it to bubbles and crises. It must be hard to optimistically prepare for the worst on a battlefield for these guys who don't have enough experience. Tanya grumbles in her mind. Major von Leinberg has been killed in action. It's the worst possible news, but it doesn't have to be a catastrophe, so she is relieved in her own way. She takes a discreet glance around the command post and sees that the old-timers understand the situation well and are working their brains to get things under control. It doesn't seem like things will descend into a damaging panic. Not bad. When she was criticized and sent to the south for trying to take matters into her own hands and nearly resisting orders, the silver lining was that she was able to bring her battalion. Thanks to that, the time she had to spend on education is halved. No, if she delegates part of it to her subordinates, she can have it yet again. In other words, rather than having to educate everyone at her own expense, she can get away with bearing a mere 25% of the burden of time and effort. Now that's what you call efficient. Anyhow, any outstanding organization is constantly being maintained so its gears don't rust. Humans are the guts of an organization, and naturally, an army incorporates fatalities into the planning and maintenance of its organizational structure. In other words, things are arranged so that the death of a single Kampfgruppen commander, no matter how great a soldier he was, won't disturb the logic of the military organization as a whole. An army that is an aggregate of countless people who can substitute for one another is a terribly expensive but extremely resilient organization. HQ is calling Kampfgruppen 7 over a wide area. They lost contact with Major von Leinberg. Though it came in via shortwave, the report from the friendly unit is that he was killed. Unless people really have their heads in the clouds, command is transferred to the next officer in line as soon as possible so as to minimize the impact to the chain of command. And in the Empire, where they are used to wars, command succession is rare but not unheard of. Sadly, in this war, however, so many high-ranking leaders have fallen that command succession is becoming normalized. As of this moment, command of Kampfgruppen 7 falls to Major von Degrachav. They say to get to work on reorganizing the lines immediately. Degrachav, Roger. You can tell headquarters. The delivery of the notification was skillful enough to suggest it was well practiced, and Tanya shouts her assent. She wants to yell about how she's being overworked, but she just barely manages to deny herself and refrain. As the deputy commander of Kampfgruppen 7, her duty under these circumstances is to make the best judgment possible. As long as it is her duty, avoiding it is against her contract. Pre-modern barbarians may have committed such injustices, but as a cultured citizen with a modern education, she absolutely cannot abide it. So to carry out her duty, she pulls out a map that shows what vague enemy information they have and starts to get a handle on the situation. Then, just as she leans over to mark the place where Major von Lindbergh and his unit were attacked, something grazes her back. Her body reacts instinctively before her brain has time to think. She instantaneously covers her head and hits the ground. Guided essentially by experience, she crawls along the earth on alert for another shot. Right after that, something rips a hole through the tent, and she hears the awful sound of whatever it was ricocheting off a building outside. Judging from the direction, it came from extremely close to the Commonwealth Republican Army's defensive position. They've got snipers out, damn it! Shit! 40mm anti-magic sniper rounds. Someone shouts a warning, and people sluggishly start to respond, but it's already too late. I'm so impatient I want to scream at them that a civilian security company would respond faster. Yes, indeed. I'm willing to bet that Executive Outcomes or some other kind of paramilitary contractor probably would do a better job, but that's beside the point in this context. They don't even have to check the damage to know what kind of ordnance is being used. Any mage is well familiar with it. The 40mm anti-material rifle. It's the most powerful non-magic gun available. More often pointed at mages than material, it's popularly known as the anti-magic rifle. It's a natural enemy of any mage. By comparison, getting shot at with shells with heavy metal casings that can almost nullify interference formulas isn't scary at all. You can take several direct hits from most heavy machine guns, and in the worst case, your defensive shell will block them entirely. But You can take several direct hits from most heavy machine guns, and in the worst case, your defensive shell will block them. That doesn't make a lot of sense. They should have fixed that sentence, by which they probably meant to say that you can take several direct hits from most heavy machine guns to a point, and in the best case, your defensive shell will block them. That's what they should say, because those two sections of that sentence, before and after the comma, contradict each other. But these 40mm rounds hardly meet any resistance ripping through protective films, and can pierce defensive shells as well. Apparently, the Commonwealth is quite proud of them. Like they resign themselves to hunting mages instead of the traditional foxes of the land or something. They probably supplied the Republic with these guns, too. God damn that country. If nothing else, they always take sports and war too seriously. Well, I'll just consider us lucky we're not being used for duck hunting practice then. Suppressive fire. Pin the enemy down. We have perimeter defense to prevent just these... Pardon me. We have perimeter defense to prevent just these sort of hazards from getting anywhere near us. The fact that it isn't functioning in the slightest pisses me off to no end. Some of us are working diligently, so what is everyone else doing, goddammit? Their inaction makes her want to clench the sand in her fists and scream as she lies on the ground. She simply can't stand it. Their performance is so terrible, she wants to shout her voice raw, inquiring just what the hell these people around her are thinking and doing. Though a 40mm is small enough for a person to carry, it's not the sort of thing you can hide easily. This is such a screw-up that if these weren't second-string troops, she would consider it willful laziness. She suppresses her emotions and keeps herself from clicking her tongue in rage, but her anger simply won't subside. If they had been properly on guard, the enemy couldn't possibly have gotten this close. We can't be getting sniped at so easily. Normally, it would never be tolerated. On top of that, I can't believe I'm the one who nearly got shot. They almost took my head off, for Christ's sake. It's terrifying to think that my logical ideas, which have the potential to contribute to anthropological economics, could be ended with such savage violence. Someone's pretty full of themselves. My human capital investments nearly defaulted in an instant. If she weren't so short, I would have been in trouble. Tanya realizes for once that she is thankful for her height, for the first time in a long while. If she had been just a little taller, she would have taken a direct hit to the head when she bent over. She isn't sure whether to feel happy or sad at that, but given that she's alive, she opts for happy. In any case, what she immediately thinks of are the basic steps to countering snipers. The classic way is to thoroughly bombard the suspected hiding place and annihilate everything. Not that the Imperial Army's supply lines are sturdy enough to allow for such extravagant shell use, but lamentably, if not doing it puts me in danger, it must be done. After all, if we were in trenches, we could sweep through area by area, but this is a desert. Here, the enemy can hide in the shadows of every sand dune, so it would take an awful lot of time and effort to find them. Blow up the entire area to get the snipers. In that case, in order to keep myself safe, unhesitatingly attacking the whole area is the correct choice. You may not be able to use that tactic in the city, but in the desert, there's no need for scruples. What are our direct support doing? Get rid of them, now! Just then, her aide-de-camp, Vice, gains temporary control. He takes the lead on eliminating the snipers by sending the response team as reinforcements. Thanks to that, Tanya can focus on patching up the chain of command, which she is grateful for. Yeah, no matter the era, an exceptional vice commander will always come in handy. He's so brilliant that if I were in personnel, I'd be advocating for his promotion. Anyhow, having left the odd jobs up to her subordinate, Tanya has to get cracking on her own prioritized list of tasks. She can't just wait around for orders and intel to come in. If she doesn't get an understanding of the situation and decide what to do about it soon, they could suffer serious losses. That makes even Tanya nervous, but she can't let the people around her see that. Luckily, the radio operator and the apparatus are safe. They had contact. She should handle things calmly with the usual smile. Just like negotiating, this situation can benefit from putting up a brave front. This is Major von Degrichow. I have assumed command. Report your status. She laughs as she warmly informs the radio operator. I nearly just met the same fate as your boss. The reply comes back filled with the same humor. If she can smile, then they can smile back, I guess. That's a good sign. If it were a stiff, nervous newbie who had survived, she would have lost all hope. It's always easier to do your job when you have a partner or competitor in a negotiation who you can trust. That's got to be true not just in business, but everywhere. 44th Battalion to CP. Captain Carlos here. I've taken over command. Jeez, how many Carlos are there in this story? I'm breaking from the text for a minute. Like, we know that Mary Sue's, Mary Sue's grandmother knows somebody named Carlo. Like, remember she said Carlo's wife must love you in like a sort of a semi-sarcastic way. And here there's a Captain Carlos. Like, it's almost like he's self-inserting his name and or pen name into the story, which is kind of funny, but I don't know if it's really a good writing idea, generally speaking, because it can backfire pretty heavily. But let's run with it for the sake of argument here. 44th Battalion to CP. Captain Carlos here. I've taken over command. She also appreciates that he asks if she's injured. A commander can't let any complaints slip out under these circumstances. So even if you're hurt, all you can do is deal with it. Man, even the lower-ranking officers in the Imperial Army have guts. Ah, Tanya adds in her head, suddenly feeling relaxed. This is fun. After all, if anyone goes into hysterics, the only thing to do is quote-unquote accidentally shoot them. So nothing helps more than having tough officers. The fact that he's not in total panic, even though his commander was just blown away in front of him, is worthy of special mention. Of course, even corporate life would have been fun with this sort of subordinate in hand. Thinking back on all the trouble and confusion training successors entailed, I feel like there's a lot companies could learn from the Army. I should write a book about this for corporate managers someday. A business book about administration strategy based on military strategy sure would have been useful. The needs are definitely there. Captain Carlos, this is Major von Degrachav. Your reception's bad. Can you improve it? The trouble is the grainy signal. She has a connection, but via shortwave, and on the battlefield, the quality is outrageously bad. My apologies, ma'am. This is the best I can do. An enemy sniper took out all the other machines. I guess this is what we'll have to work with then. Well, let's get down to business, shall we? The trip south on the boat was quite pleasant. Maybe it was because their ride was a converted Reichspost cargo ship. For a ship to transport troops, it was remarkably comfortable. Come to think of it, the good treatment probably relaxed them too much. But there was nothing to be done for that. Having just enjoyed the officer mess lunch, of which the Navy was so proud, Grants and the others felt they had gotten a proper meal for the first time in a long while. Even the battalion commander was pleased enough to give it passing remarks. That said, it's her fault that we're here in the first place. She had attempted to exceed her authority right before the ceasefire. Normally, that was the kind of spark that could cause major problems. After all, it was an outrage, more like resisting orders than overstepping her authority in point of truth. The operation was rejected by the normal procedure, and then her appeal, too, was rejected. All that was fine, but once she grabbed the base commander by the lapels and essentially threatened him, there was no way to cover it up. They had been just about to sortie after she shook off even his efforts to stop her. Yes, their sincere, conscientious battalion commander did that. It was enough to make First Lieutenant Weiss, her longtime aide-de-camp, wonder under his breath if she would get court-martialed for the act. For a while, it kept seeming like her summons would arrive at any time. But ironically, the arrival of an external threat blew all those issues away in a single stroke. The intervention of the Commonwealth. Nominally, the Republic had asked the Commonwealth to mediate peace negotiations. But then the negotiators offered the same awful terms that were rejected in the quote-unquote notice they had sent before, with the assumption they would be rejected yet again. As such, anyone with a hair's breadth of knowledge on the matter could see they had no intention of mediating peace talks whatsoever. The terms were far too biased. There was even a one-sided, quote-unquote, final notice. Of course, the Empire spurned the Commonwealth's ultimatum. As everyone expected, it was flatly rejected at once. But what the Empire did not expect was the Republican government's declaration of total resistance. The Empire had been negotiating for peace with the Republic under the assumption of a conditional surrender. Instead, General DeLugo, leading the escaped remnants of the army, declared resistance as Vice Minister of Defense and began claiming that he and his supporters were the true Republican government in exile. Officially, of course, the government was in the capital, currently occupied by the Empire, but the troops in most of the colonies sided with DeLugo. Contrary to their beliefs that he was a Commonwealth puppet, DeLugo proclaimed the Free Republic. He mustered the colonies on the southern continent and called for continuing the war against the Empire to the last man. And the Republican forces stationed on the politically tumultuous southern continent were too heavily equipped to be called regional patrol units. The mages stationed there, with an eye on countering the Commonwealth or the Kingdom of Ildoa, posed no small threat. It went without saying that the Imperial Army General Staff was at wit's end over the matter. The Free Republic, which allied itself with the Commonwealth, was capable of mobilizing all of that force against the Empire. The trick was to leave more than a certain number of troops on the mainland while taking care of the situation on the southern continent. Faced with such a challenge, the higher-ups apparently decided that they needed Grance's battalion commander, even though she had a tendency to take matters into her own hands. They did cancel all her pending decorations applications from the Rhine front, though. She couldn't be completely defended. On the other hand, that was as far as their ire went. When it came to the commander, that treatment did seem par for the course. But as a result, people ended up conscious of how valuable it was to have a strong mage force. Grants and the others were surprised and delighted by the much improved pay they ended up getting as a result of the incident. The one problem was that, despite the raise, in the desert-covered southern lands, there wasn't really a way to spend their salary anyway. The southern continent was famous for its harsh, inhospitable climate, so they could accept their fate to some extent, but they couldn't help but want to whine about how badly they longed for an ice-cold beer. Other than that, they were on board with the strategy of striking the Commonwealth and Republican colonies to take away their ability to continue fighting. Cracking down is a fine strategy. Both Lieutenant Vice and the commander basically agreed in principle on that point. The issue was the quality of the troops who were deployed to the south. They were undoubtedly second-string units. The reserves and replenishments that had been scraped together were severely lacking in training. They were so bad they made even Grants, who had been treated like a chick still wearing its eggshell on the Rhine front, seem like a fully prepared soldier. Surely, that was why they saw value in using a unit baptized in iron on the Rhine. The gossipy old-timers placed bets on when General von Rommel, the corps commander, would explode. Incidentally, the most popular wager was that he had already lost his temper before they arrived. That was how it was. The battalion was more than welcome due to all the veterans. One look at the transport ship was enough to see how wholeheartedly Commander von Rommel welcomed them. He clearly expects a lot from us. And having things expected of you isn't a bad thing. I want to punch my past self for thinking that. Magic Second Lieutenant Warren Grants mentally gave his past self a light wallop and then moved to focus on the situation before him. The mission itself was simple. It was a mission to counter snipers. In this limitless, rolling desert zone, with no shortages of hiding places, they had to find camouflaged snipers. The enemy was smart. They wouldn't be found so easily. So Grants and his unit's only option was to blow the whole area sky high using explosion formulas, but that method caused its own problems. No one had any idea how they could confirm whether they got him or not. HQ to all units. I say again, HQ to all units. On top of that, the desert dust put even their durable infantry rifles out of commission. The other machines were hopeless. Computation orbs did all right, but the bullets for holding formulas required frequent inspections on this battlefield. No matter how reliable the newest Type 97 assault computation orb was, if the critical magic bullets weren't stable, it was nearly impossible to function. Incidentally, I don't know what he's talking about by reliable infantry rifle. If they're using model Mondragoon rifles, which are what I believe they are using, those are Mexican rifles that were made in Austria, I think it was Austria or Switzerland or something, on a contract for the Mexican government for the Mexican-American War. Some got sent, not nearly all of them, because the Mexicans found that there was issues with reliability, so they canceled the contract, and then whoever manufactured them sold them to the Germans for World War I use because they had a bunch of rifles to get rid of that nobody wanted. And then the Germans found, sure enough, it's not reliable enough to use in the trenches, so we'll give it to the Air Force because we haven't figured out how to put machine guns on our planes yet. That's what they're fighting with. So in terms of reliability, they have not in the least reliable rifles, so that they would jam in a desert is hardly surprising, with all the sandstorms and the rest. Okay, I'm going to reread from the top of the paragraph here. HQ to all units. I say again, HQ to all units. On top of that, the Southern dust put even their durable, quote-unquote, infantry rifles out of commission. The other machines were hopeless. Computation orbs did all right, but the bullets for holding formulas required frequent inspections on this battlefield. No matter how reliable the new Type 97 assault computation orb was, if the critical magic bullets weren't stable, it was nearly impossible to function. But the higher-ups didn't take that into consideration. Or rather, they couldn't. After all, Commander von Rommel was going to wage his maneuver battles no matter how crazy the environment was. The announcement came in and said there were no changes in their orders. Close the flanks. I say again, close the flanks. It was maneuver warfare the moment they landed on the beaches. Everyone was for attacking the enemy while they were off their guard, thinking it would take some time for them to get their supply lines and other logistics together. Ferry 01 to Kampfgruppen 7. It's just as we heard. We're pushing the lines forward. Cerberus 01 to Kampfgruppen 3. We're following Kampfgruppen 7. Be ready to support the breakthrough. The problem lay with the doctrine of swinging around the back to encircle and annihilate while the center pinned the enemy down. The guys on the sea side had it a little better, but no one could stand between The guys on the seaside had it a little better, but no one could stand being ordered to perform an outflanking maneuver in the sand. A long-distance march in the desert, with barely any landmarks to work with. And they did it at combat speed. Just the thought of Kampfgruppen 7 and 3's level of training made them want to go back to the mainland or the beaches at Brest. Prepare for formation flying. Stay in position. Check the beacon. You reply directly to the battalion commander. Formation flying orders. They followed the orders from CP and checked their receivers. Sure enough, the one putting out the guiding beacon was the battalion commander. Apparently, Major von Degrachaff was flying in the lead. The guys from the Kampfgruppen were merely surprised, but what she was doing must have been really hard. The guys from the Kampfgruppen 7 were surprised, for what she was doing must have been really hard. She's commanding combat while leading the fight. Her brain must have superhuman processing power. I, for one, would get caught up navigating and be worthless as a commander. Though such thoughts were running through his mind, Grantz prepared himself for practiced motions. This was his first highly mobile battle in the desert, but the basics were the same as always. He hadn't been at it for very long, but through repetition he had mastered taking an unsentimental view and preparing efficiently. If you don't want to go blind, check your goggles, boys.
At the same time, as a young officer, he was abundantly flexible and adaptable. He was one of the first people to understand why Major von Degrachaff brought out bigger aviation goggles for desert combat. Lots of people complained about the big, clunky, and heavy new goggles, but Grants made sure his subordinates wore them. They could mitigate the light to some degree and provided protection against sand. He understood instinctively that they were required gear for fighting in the harsh environment of the southern continent. Ferry 01 to Kampfgruppen 7. Begin the advance. All right, let's get going. Thusly equipped, they would fight a war. It didn't matter where or what the environment was like. That was the will of both Second Lieutenant Grantz's country and the other countries involved. So, the soldiers had to do it, whether they liked it or not. Same day, Free Republican Provisional National Defense meeting. The side making gains in battle surely celebrates. Meanwhile, the side suffering the losses finds the situation intolerable. Such is the way of things. Having drained his tea with a sigh, General DeLugo was looking up at the ceiling with a fed-up expression on his face. A nasty blame game was raging before him, with no end in sight. He glanced at the participants before lowering his eyes to the documents before him on the table. Just getting one combat report together had required so much effort. Drafting the report of a single encounter had taken a lot out of him. He picked up the papers and glanced at them and examined them. Rather than conveying the course of the battle against the Imperial Army, most of the reports were made up primarily of criticism of colleagues and self-praise. It seemed that the colonial troops still took honor, courage, and chivalry very seriously and thought it was their duty to devote most of the pages of their reports to those topics. It was a truly unfortunate, outdated state of affairs. He scoffed in secret, thinking that a meeting for the sake of a meeting was a great way to put it. They were liable to destroy themselves before they managed to take back the fatherland. The discontent of the troops who had followed him from the mainland was also near the breaking point. But no, now I can actually act, and decisively. It was because he saw the opportunity that DeLugo was patiently going along with this farce. He needed to hold out for the right timing. Let us consider an operation to retake Taurus. Having decided the time was ripe, the Supreme Commander ignored the tumult in the room and made his declaration. Before the escape, DeLugo had been a Major General. It was an awfully high rank for his age, but there were many who had reached it before him. And in fact, he was the youngest general in the room, and it was quicker to count him rank-wise from the bottom. Normally, he was one of the generals who should have yielded to more senior officers. Yet here he sat, at the head of the table, due purely to duty. He was Vice Minister of both Defense and the Armed Forces of the Free Republic. It was because of his authority to take command of the army in case of emergency that he was able to lead the Republican forces now. Our forces concentrated. I beg your pardon, General DeLugo, but what did you just say? Of course, though he had the authority, that was only on paper. Even though the generals dispatched to the colonial defense forces had fallen off the promotion track, they were still DeLugo's seniors in point of truth. They weren't about to submissively listen to a general far younger than them who had graduated from the academy far more recently. Not to mention, DeLugo mentally added, viewing the situation objectively, these generals who got sent to the colonial armies probably don't think there is anything interesting about someone who stayed on the track at Central. DeLugo knew better than anyone that although they were nominally gathered together to take back the fatherland, the situation inside the Free Republic was rather chaotic in nature. In spite of this, it was lucky the colonial army accepted his command at all, at least organizationally. Well, One could also say that, rather than agreeing to him leading, the colonial commanders had no other moves to make and just simply didn't object. Still, DeLugo was the most competent among them, and he was blessed in that he had home country units he could rely on without question. While some of the troops he had brought with him were lacking in actual combat experience, some who had been on the Rhine lines and others who had been in the middle of getting their equipment upgraded at Central. While some of the troops he had brought with him were lacking in actual combat experience, some had been on the Rhine lines and others had been in the middle of getting their equipment upgraded at Central. So overall, they were quite powerful and a force to be reckoned with. And since the command structure had been built around DeLugo from the beginning, the forces were cohesive and well-disciplined. Even if there were some supply issues, the troops that escaped from the homeland were still the ones best equipped. They were better off than the soldiers who had been in the colonies for a long time. That in itself spoke volumes to the standards of the colonial forces. Above all, it was clear that the elite mages from home were a notch above the troops they joined up with. But DeLugo mentally cautioned himself. Careful. That's as far as it goes. They were relying on the colonial army for their connection to the administration and logistical support. On top of that, even if they were only sent here to be kept on payroll and nothing else, there were far more generals in the colonial forces than in the mainland troops he had brought. As a result, their relationship had been awkward at best, and rather than engaging in combat as a unified organization, they were more or less acting independently. They are, but I oppose. More than anything, DeLugo's position was vague. Just the order to concentrate the troops meant getting hit with a lot of red tape and bargaining. He faced opposition from the passive, do-nothing colonial bureaucrats. Even if he had said something in a meeting, the other generals coolly argued back, and that was it. Our outdated, quote-unquote, values are an expression of our chivalrous spirit, upholding honor and self-respect, they would say with straight faces. But DeLugo knew that ultimately they were simply resisting him, going over their heads. That was the real issue. And even today, they were opposing the advance of the army he had gathered to take back Taurus naval base. It was always like that, like pouring new wine into old wineskins. The units were supposed to support the Commonwealth defense, but when the Commonwealth requested reinforcements, he shamefully had to tell them they didn't have the fuel. Maybe we just don't get along, but that was an idiotic mistake. When the chief of logistics calmly informed him they didn't know where to get fuel, DeLugo had to push the boundaries of his patience.
He wanted to scream back at him. How many years have you guys been governing this colony? On top of that, unbelievably, some of the units had been assigned to protect the general's own private interests. This was what they got for taking idiots who thought of colonial service as leisure time and leaving them to their own devices. The generals had interests in so many colonial assets that the troops could no longer move freely. So DeLugo made an executive decision. If your wineskin is old, the only thing to do is get a new one. There's no sense in shoring it up. Sorry, are you all opposed? And besides, once an order comes down, you don't get to oppose it. Where do you guys get off with and find the nerve to resist? He had been thinking it for some time, but kept talking himself down until today. Yes, it's vital that we defend key locations. We can't agree to this sort of operation. The colonial generals were completely caught up in their own internal interests. Really, he would like to have the military police expose them and their corruption, even personally. But a war was on, and the enemy was right up ahead. His top priority was to cut inept generals from the chain of command as quickly as possible. Under the circumstances, he didn't even care if that meant some golden parachutes. Of course, once he resolved to carry out a reshuffle of his cabinet and his cabinet of generals, rather, he prepared carefully. I'll reread that. Of course, once he resolved to carry out a reshuffle, he prepared carefully. The units they commanded were already under his control de facto. He had nipped in the bud the possibility of a military resistance. The NCOs, that's non-commissioned officers, and lower-ranking commissioned officers were the first he turned. Now he simply had to replace the command structure of the gathered colonial army. Regardless of the generals, there were actually lots of great non-commissioned officers and soldiers of lower ranks in the colonies. Colonial service was a 1 to 2 year rotation, and the fact that he could expect most of them to follow orders from Central was no small boon. Additionally, DeLugo had a tight hold on the reins to the escaped units. Now that he was sure he could do the reshuffle and unify the command chain, there was no reason to hesitate any longer. All I need to do is dismiss these guys. Keeping his voice matter-of-fact, DeLugo proceeded with the plan he had envisioned. I believe I've grasped the situation. If you are that strongly against it, then I have no choice. General DeLugo, do you mean to say that you understand? Why, yes. It's too bad, really. But it would probably be difficult to command in an operation you so oppose. I would never want to pressure you to do such a thing. Things would end quickly. By the time most generals realized that something was up, things would end quickly. By the time most generals realized something was up, he had to be ready. Which was why DeLugo then played his trump card, control over personnel. I've found other more suitable positions for all of you. You can go as you are, so please serve in the government office as counselors. Counselor in the colonial government on the southern continent was, frankly, a sinecure to warm up the window seats in the government office. It was usually given to people missing in action until they were found, unless they were declared dead. It was a clear statement that your presence or lack thereof didn't matter one iota. To put it another way, it was an appointment that assumed your absence. Now, of course, that meant it completely removed all of your real power, which was only natural since it was a post a person missing in action was meant to fulfill. No one expected someone MIA to get any work done. General DeLugo! The generals kicked up a fuss once they finally realized what was happening, but DeLugo had zero intention of lending them an ear. He already had written appointments organized for all of them. The vital mid-ranking officers in control of the units in the field were all backing him. He had exercised his power over personnel and forced through the reshuffle precisely because he could solve the problem without it evolving into an obnoxious fight. Your orders have been arranged, gentlemen. Now then, if you'll excuse me, I have an operation to lead. It may not mean much, but I sincerely hope you find success in your new endeavors. Leaving them with that in a voice that said the decision was final, he stood roughly and laid a hand on the door to leave. With no mind to listen to the jumble of distressed shouting behind him, he felt refreshed. I sure told them. He wouldn't let them wreak havoc in the army anymore. No, he wouldn't let anyone get in his way. After leaving the former commanders in their uproar, DeLugo proceeded straight to another room where others were on standby. Gentlemen, sorry to keep you waiting. Let's get this operation going, shall we? It was the combat commanders who stood and saluted him. The ones from home plus the ones from the colonies made up his staff. This was the entirety of the Republican Army, the Free Republican Army. In order to carry out organized combat, they chose DeLugo. And he knew that was why he was able to unify the command chain so rapidly. Okay, what's our status? It may have been cornered, but the Republic still just barely counted as a major power. Trying to make a comeback in the colonies, it had more than a little talent in its ranks, in its staff, in its general, and in its seasoned soldiers. It had retained the framework of an army, at the very least. Its officers with combat experience could hold their own when it came to analyzing the necessary data and planning operations. It wouldn't be all that difficult to slaughter the Empire's 2 divisions if they clashed properly, and DeLugo knew how important it was to think of a plan for clashing in that way. The enemy general Rommel had taken out the Commonwealth forces in surprisingly mobile battles before they could even assemble. So there was a common understanding that a decentralized advance to engage would be reckless. And since, logistically speaking, it was hard to move a centralized, concentrated army in the desert, supplies were also a major limiting factor. The problem of where to get water could never be ignored when moving a large army around in such conditions. Water had to be prioritized over everything else in the desert. Running short even once could turn into a deadly supply crisis. Soldiers without oil simply had to walk, but soldiers without water died of thirst. The Imperial forces, on the other hand, only 1 corps, could probably advance altogether. They did have to deal with the water issue as well, of course, but since they had fewer people, it made things easier. Surely that had to be the case. Naturally, DeLugo could expect that if they advanced separately, the Imperial troops would destroy them all. Everything is going according to plan. The Imperial army is on the move. Now that was why he had made so much noise about retaking their lost land. He had serious doubts whether those generals could maintain confidentiality, so he had emphasized it, to create the illusion they were making that move. He gathered a lot of supplies and simultaneously took a look at the various routes. The Imperial forces were far from incompetent. Surely they understood the Republicans wanted to capture their base. According to intelligence DeLugo had received via the Commonwealth and their spies, they were already building defensive lines in Taurus. The status showed that the enemy thought exactly what DeLugo wanted them to think. Well then, but, he grinned. Every person present responded with the same scheming look. This situation was exactly what they were gunning for. General von Rommel was exceptional. Any officer who saw his war records would admit it. He was the top authority on maneuver warfare of his generation, and DeLugo praised him for it despite being his sworn enemy. After all, everyone understood the difficulties involved in mobile battle in the desert. How hard it would be to pull off a timely split-up advance in the sand where you were liable to lose track of your own position. Just his ability to quickly move troops in an organized way through the desert was worthy of admiration. That said so much for his organizational efficiency, it made DeLugo sick. If their opponent was this militarily adept, wrangling with him head-on was too much of a risk. Naturally, the enemy general would understand that, though the city was at the mouth of a bay, it would be impossible to defend if surrounded. But even a child would know not to take on all the Republican troops on the southern continent with a single corps. In other words, it would be simple for anyone to recognize the need to resolve this situation. They could probably also recognize that the competent soldiers of the Imperial military would have some ideas about how to achieve that, if not many. For instance, withdrawal. If the enemy didn't feel the need to defend the base to their deaths, they could simply retreat to Ildoan territory. But, Dilugo smiled inwardly. The Imperial army didn't have any choices. As an expeditionary force, even if they wanted to retreat, they would absolutely need to secure port facilities. And the only port facilities they could use at the time were those stationed in Taurus. They did still have the option of retreating to the Kingdom of Ildoa, but it was probably safe to consider that one option politically unacceptable. In that case, anyone could understand the conclusion that striking units before they concentrated was the only move the Imperial army could make. It was a textbook scenario. And for that reason, Dilugo could also guess how the Imperial officers would handle it. They would take all the fighting power they could and secure local numerical superiority in order to strike the Republican units that were probably advancing separately. With that, they could achieve a mobile defense. That had to be the best answer available to Rommel. Since he knew that, Dilugo had no need to send his individual units out to get destroyed. On the contrary, he could lure the enemy out of their nest and overwhelm him with a large force and crush him utterly. Yes, the report is that they've sortied. And the notion he was waiting for had already come in. The Commonwealth intelligence had volunteered to do recon, and they had a handle on the situation in Taurus. The Imperial army had left Taurus. They recognized the report in it almost real time. At that point, the Imperial army was doing just what the Free Republican army wanted it to. They think they're going to surprise us and attack while we're advancing all split up. It is a truly by-the-book method of coping with this situation. We've cornered them so badly, they have no other options left. All we have to do now is destroy them. Now there will have been a point to fighting these dopes. In order to lure them out, the Republicans had intentionally leaked their strategic objectives all over the place. They even performed highway maintenance to throw their enemy off track. Well, actually, Dilugo had the field engineers devoted to building a minefield, so the infantry were the ones quote-unquote working on the highway. But even so, at this rate, their deception was paying off in spades. The Empire had crawled out of its nest. All we must do now is hit them while they're blithely on their way to carry out their quote-unquote sneak attack. For a short distance, the supply lines will manage even if we concentrate our forces. Even if the Imperial forces notice us concentrating and retreat, I don't mind one bit. I lose nothing by it. At that point, the Republicans could carry out their decentralized advance unobstructed. All right, gentlemen, let's get ready. Finally. It was how they all felt. Finally, we can strike back at the Empire. They were elated. The Imperial forces intended to take them by surprise, so they prioritized speed over enemy spotting as they approached. The plan was to draw them into a minefield and hit them with a fierce attack. The Imperial forces may be elite, but we'll catch them in a crossfire from our light, quick units and thoroughly obliterate them with our heavy units. That was how everyone felt as they formed up, envisioning the plan being carried out. Now, the day to achieve those results had come. In terms of numbers, the Republicans were sure they had the upper hand. And when they fought them head-on, they wouldn't necessarily be inferior then either. Sure, their opponents were seasoned old-timers, but in this instance, numbers meant everything. Technically speaking, they were both major powers still. If one side overwhelmed the other with numbers, the winner would be decided then and there. We strike back, gentlemen. Yes, sir. And so, Republican morale was high.
They were about to launch into their long-awaited counterattack. Finally, we're going to scare the living daylights out of the Empire. October 6th, Unified Year, 1925. Taurus Naval Base, outskirts. Good grief. At this rate, I'm not going to even have any tea for tea time. And somehow, managing to escape the blazing Taurus Naval Base, trading with the nomadic tribes, had been going brilliantly. He thought he was getting along with them pretty well. The intelligence exchange was actually worthwhile, too. It was with the nomads' help that he had been able to observe Taurus Naval Base and get a handle on the Imperial Army's movements. But John did have one irresolvable complaint about his work right now, an absence of tea, which was a life-or-death matter for a civilized gentleman of the Commonwealth. The nomads enjoyed their own infusions, but it wasn't the tea John loved. And when he tried, with no expectations, to request some from the home country, they heartlessly told him to procure it on the ground. Humans are weak creatures, and hope even when they know things won't turn out, so the indifferent response upset him. Pardon me, I'm going to reread that. Humans are weak creatures, and hope even when they know things won't turn out. That's not a proper sentence. What the fuck? Humans are weak creatures and hope even when they know things won't turn out, they still will. That's what they should say there. So the indifferent response upset him. Seriously, fix the typos in your book, Carlo Zen. Really, what the hell? Thus the man recalled his home country's cold response and lamented dramatically. Well, there was the fact that John was in the desert and clad in the local costume, too. He led a caravan, mingling with the nomads, clumping along atop a camel. He fit right in, and at a glance you wouldn't even notice him. He was lucky he had managed to take on some officers who were familiar with the desert to some degree. Well, that was indeed a silver lining, anyway. They would be able to keep doing business with some of the tribes, which would allow them to keep their intelligence net up. His message had reached the Republican side fine, so John could finally take a break. Whatever else happens, it seems like the reconnaissance will work out. Things were so calm, he found time to complain. One could say his situation wasn't too shabby, all told. Dear guest, you will keep our terms, yeah? Of course, you have my word, sir. I've got more confidential funds than I know what to do with. But a gentleman through and through, John lamented, even though I'm sorely lacking in tea. They say to rejoice that I have money? He wasn't so lacking in elegance or John Bull spirit that he could be happy about that. Sometimes he sadly wondered if the twits in Whitehall were too tainted by the ideas of the city. It really made him want to cry. Would that bunch in Whitehall honestly tell me to drink money instead of tea? He really wanted them to send him some, or do something at least. He was of a mind to demand more attention to the welfare of agents working abroad. They simply don't understand the suffering people go through one whit. Those pseudo-gentlemen who knew nothing about actual working conditions were such a pain in the ass. But that was precisely why he needed to focus on the job before him. So he brought his attention back to the present. So that's the situation. I'd like it if we could keep a good relationship. John had plenty of opinions, but he was an outstanding agent of the Foreign Service. He was maintaining observation and communication nets using the nomadic tribes. At the same time, he was providing weapons to some of them to support guerrilla activity. He had also contracted to receive any Imperial prisoners they took, and made an agreement for Commonwealth prisoners as well. At any rate, John had built the network necessary to confront the Empire. It went without saying that it was an extraordinary amount of work. John feigned calm atop the one-humped camel. He had made it through countless tricky situations in his time in the desert.
Once he even got caught up in a nomad conflict and roused his old bones to take up a rifle. John was a fine fox hunter, but he had had enough of the camel-mounted cavalry attackers, so much so that if he had had a chance, he wanted to bring a submachine gun, or actually the new model of the Imperial-made assault rifles would be good too. Oh joy, they have assault rifles now. MG42s, or actually no, those are machine gun. STG-44s, that's probably what they have. Or MP-44s. Beautiful. Fucking beautiful. The supplies we get from you help us too. This was one of the tribe's chiefs. About their dealings, he was positive. He welcomed the opportunity to acquire live ammunition to unify the tribes in the area. After all, since heavy arms, explosives, and the like were mainly acquired from abroad, securing a stable way to get them before the other tribes could was a big deal. But unlike John, they hadn't sworn alliance to any nation, instead seeking to build their own. But if you want to see what we can do, shouldn't you be sending in the soldiers as well? Which meant they often offered terms that people like John could never afford to swallow. The relationship between the nomad tribes and the Commonwealth had to be kept secret. If word got out that he was embedded in a tribe, he wouldn't be able to infiltrate places as part of their caravans like he did now. More than anything, clandestine activities had to be kept clandestine. For example, he absolutely couldn't leave any record that he was working with the tribes behind the scenes in any way that could lead to an anti-Republic war in the Republican colonies. John's hardships would continue, so he had made a wish. Please, let the Free Republican Army do their job properly. Now, that's the end of that scene, and I'm honestly getting flashbacks to Lawrence of Arabia and his incidents, like his involvement trying to fight the Ottomans in World War I and following. Like, if I recall correctly, British agents were basically sent to the region to stir up conflict and a Arab revolt against the Ottoman occupation and basically try and help them fall apart at the end of World War I. And the British and French and all the rest had basically said, okay, we'll grant you autonomy, you can become an independent Arab state that's unified. And of course, after World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the British and French had signed this basically secret agreement. I forget what it's called. And they basically said, okay, we're going to carve up the territory between us into new colonies and screw the natives that we had made alliances with previously. Which isn't too dissimilar to what the Spanish did in the Americas, to be frank, with the Aztecs and all the rest. They would have native allies that they would make agreements with. Those allies would help them to defeat their former enemy, and then once both had been weakened sufficiently, the Spanish would turn on them and occupy their territories outright. So yeah, enemy of my enemy is my friend, until there's no more enemy for my friend, and then I become their enemy and I take over all their shit. That's kind of how it goes. Anyway, so continuing now with the text, and pardon for the brief interlude. Sorry, pardon me for the brief little interlude. October 12th, Unified Year 1925, Imperial Army Camp. General von Rommel, I'd like to make a suggestion, if I may. Even when the veil of night is about to fall, breaks are an unattainable luxury for members of the Imperial Army General Staff. The Air Fleet has turned in their final reconnaissance report for the day, but the work of analyzing them with insufficient lighting and equipment awaits the staffers on the ground. Still, just as everyone is thinking it will be a quiet night, Major von Degrichaff shows up, and the first thing out of her mouth is that she has a suggestion to make. Naturally, it is especially surprising that a field officer would come to offer opinions at this time of day. What could it be at this hour, they wonder. That said, almost no one finds it suspicious. Degrichaff's tone is not tense at all, but utterly businesslike. and it's not so uncommon for someone to suggest something to the commander. Well, the time of day is somewhat odd, but it fits with the Imperial Army's tradition of taking action when called upon. So there are no reproachful glares saying, "How rude," but it is nonetheless strange enough that almost everyone looks over in spite of themselves out of curiosity. What in the world is this field officer worried about? To Tanya, though, that right there is what she wants to bring up. The indecisive gazes of the officers and their hesitation is exactly what makes her anxious. In this situation, under these circumstances, the faces of the staffers don't seem worried at all. She has to say something. What is it? Well, it's wonderful to have a boss who will at least listen to you, if nothing else. A boss who increases incentives for his subordinates creates the best military environment. It's so much easier to work with someone like this. Tanya's mood lightens as she senses that they will be able to get along and respect each other's mutual interests. That's why she feels that they should step in to cover for each other if necessary. I'd like permission to scout ahead of the main forces. Naturally, it is a plan that serves both of their interests, although it conceals her true intentions on the matter. Tanya doesn't want to do anything dangerous at all, hence her desire to move cautiously. The military would be in trouble if there was a miscalculation, right? And if that happened, the mages, by their very nature, are the branch that would be worked extra hard doing recon and force and pursuit battles as a result, essentially extinguishing the fire when it broke out. Tanya is not the type to spare efforts Tanya is not the type to spare efforts now if she can reduce risk in the future. That could reveal our sneak attack plan. What's your intent? I believe our knowledge of enemy movements is insufficient, sir. Naturally, her outward expression of these sentiments is fully armed with logic. Armies are rational to a point. Oftentimes, they don't make sense, but they can't ignore reason completely. That's only natural. Arguing some theory that bends physical laws won't help them defeat their enemies. We've sent out reconnaissance units, though. We're currently dependent on the Air Force units in Taurus. Tanya understands their current dilemma, how difficult it is to perform recon while advancing. So she drives her point home before he can tell her that that's why they're relying on the Air Force. And we knew this, but Air Force units are limited by their navigation apparatus capabilities. It's difficult for them to perform night reconnaissance. True indeed at a glance. It makes sense to send the Air Force to scout ahead of the advancing ground army. Certainly, it would be nearly impossible for the average foot soldier to scout ahead in a desert with no landmarks. On that point, a reconnaissance aircraft endowed with a navigation machine does have the advantage. But at night, aircraft run into a lot of problems. Aerial photography capabilities are extremely limited at night, and it's not uncommon to simply not be able to get any at all. Now, of course, she knows that General von Rommel and the staffers are doing their very best with what they have on hand. The army is focusing on advancing quickly and efficiently in order to strike the enemy forces before they can concentrate. Due to time limitations, they haven't done anywhere near enough recon. The Imperial military isn't stupid enough to simply not worry about that, which is why aircraft were arranged. And they are handling the situation with cooperative efforts between the air and the ground forces. That is an important, respectable achievement, and Tanya fully acknowledges that fact. Still, no matter how great their efforts, there are too many technical limitations for aircraft to do reconnaissance of the ground by night, and the chance for accidents would be too great if they sent them up anyway. They can't ignore the risk that the enemy could get a clue about their movements from a crashed plane. And even without that, our intel is incomplete. Disregarding those issues, Tanya is forced to point out, per her obligations as an officer, that the trickier problem is their limited field of vision.
Air units have conducted reconnaissance of the vicinity, but the problems with that are fuel and territory under enemy air forces. No matter how faithfully, no matter how earnestly they carry out their missions, there are still limitations, right? It has to be said. And the Air Force reports they've gone to such lengths to get only one side of the situation. As a staffer, too, she has to point out that if they rely on the Air Force too much, they run the risk of biased data or outright misunderstandings. Given these concerns, I firmly believe we should take adequate precautions. In short, even if it's only her outward-facing argument, those issues can't be ignored so easily. And her suggestion is in the commander's best interest as well. Tanya is proud that she can offer a win-win proposal. All right then, permission granted. You have my gratitude. I'll take my battalion out immediately. She thanks him and exits the tent. She promptly calls up her battalion. Since First Lieutenant Weiss was on standby for rapid response, he answers in one ring. Splendid. Satisfied with his performance, she alerts him they will be sortying shortly. After additionally ordering careful preparations, she races across the sand back to her own tent. Long-range night reconnaissance, and in a desert to boot. They need to double-check their navigation instruments thoroughly. They have to be ready for the possibility of a sandstorm cutting off communications. They make all the preparations a unit operating solo can in the unique climate and environment of a desert. Upon reaching her tent, Tanya takes a look at the navigation chart with the help of her adjutant, 2nd Lieutenant Serebriakov, and consults with Weiss to plan when and where they should search for the enemy. Considering the possibility of unforeseen encounters with recon forces, they split into companies. A total of 4 companies will fan out to form a line, and after searching, they will return to a designated meeting point. An orthodox method, but given the situation, it should be useful. In order to resist the Republican forces during their decentralized advance, locating them is essential. If she locates the enemy ahead of time, under the pretext of officer reconnaissance, she decreases their risk of an encounter battle. She definitely is not opposed to doing work behind the scenes to minimize danger in advance. It pleases her greatly to do a reliable, thorough job. More than anything, she stifles a laugh. Thinking back at how hard they got worked on the Rhine front. I'm just glad it's not recon in force. Recon in force meant they had to go forward without getting shot at, whereas regular old reconnaissance meant all they had to do is bring back adequate intelligence. Even if they had to be prepared to get shot at, it's a lot more relaxing to simply fly when that isn't the assumption. Now, of course, she hasn't forgotten that they're on a battlefield where all risks still apply. In a recon mission, there's always the danger that the enemy will pursue, and she understands that fully. But right now, they haven't received any reports of enemy contact in the entire area. In that case, this should be a pretty enjoyable flight. And there's also the option of discovering and striking small command posts too. Being safe is unconditionally wonderful, and getting results while safe is even more wonderful still. The other important point is that in the opposite situation, that is, if risks suddenly escalate past a tolerable level, all the battalion needs to do is turn around and break away. Thus, that night, Tanya ascends into the sky in a relatively relaxed state of mind. Of course, even a desert gets terribly cold in the dark, but it's quiet and calm, so the journey is a leisurely night flight. As someone with experience on the Rhine lines and in the north, and given the lack of nighttime scrambles and large-scale enemy units coming to attack, she finds the job a simple matter of flying through the tranquil sky. That said, while at first she is glad for a smooth flight, as time goes on and they get further out, a sense of unease gradually begins to grate on her. It's too quiet. We could come into contact with an enemy patrol or commando unit any time now. Keep an extra sharp watch on the ground. Yes, ma'am. All units, keep your guard up against the sky and the ground alike. We are already close to the projected enemy location. Look out for patrols or commandos. Pay special attention to the dunes. Don't miss any light sources. It's entirely possible that the enemy is alert to the possibility of a search. Conducting a decentralized advance in secret is a logical move. That means we have to be extra thorough. But we fly and fly and fly still on and meet no enemy forces. No matter how far we go, we don't even spot any other life forms besides us, much less the enemy. Ferry 01 to Ferry Battalion members. Normally, an empty battlefield is a welcome state of affairs. There aren't very many people who want to cause trouble for themselves, so normally we should be happy the enemy is nowhere to be found. Still, there are a number, albeit a small number, of significant exceptions. For example, it's no good if there is nothing in a space or territory where there is supposed to be something. That's not nothing here, but something missing, something elsewhere unaccounted for. Commanders, report in. Company 2, no contact. We haven't spotted a damn thing. Company 3, nothing beside us here. Pardon me, nothing besides us here. Company 4, contact negative. So the lack of an expected occurrence is a sign of a gravely worrisome situation. That's weird. This is a bit absurd. The enemy isn't here. They are supposed to be here, but they're not. If they were missing from one position, that would be one thing. But if they're missing from every projected position across the front, you start to feel like you're chasing phantoms. It's as if their decentralized advance is a sandy illusion. An illusion? Now that's one hypothesis. But what if the hypothesis is proven to be reality? The plan is to take out each individual group of enemies approaching in a decentralized way. I see. They'll be too much to handle if they're concentrated. But if they're split into 3, we are able to overwhelm them both quantitatively and qualitatively. So, General von Rommel didn't make a mistake in having us go out to destroy them before they are able to surround Taurus Naval Base. At least, not if the enemy is actually conducting a decentralized advance. But surely that must not be. Our intention was to attack the split-up enemy before they concentrated. But the way things are looking, there's a good chance they're actually concentrated now already. They could even already be in battle formation. Now then, our headquarters still hasn't been able to locate them. If, under these circumstances, we get attacked by an enemy force twice our size, what will happen then? Clearly, we'll end up on the bad side of Lanchester's law. If the enemy is divided, we can win. But if they're concentrated, we won't be able to handle them. Before I continue here, I'm honestly curious what the heck Lanchester's law is. I've never heard that term before, and there does not appear to be any form of editor's note here. I'm quite curious as to that. I'll have to splice something in on the video portion of this accompanying the audio track. Anyway, continuing. Connect me to headquarters. It's urgent. Hurry, goddammit, it's an emergency. We thought we could make fun of them for advancing split up. Instead, they got the jump on us. No, perhaps the Imperial Army was too arrogant. Full of regret, she raises her voice. The Imperial Army was too conceited. How could we underestimate the enemy's intelligence? What a grievous error. The mistake of following precedent because we stopped thinking indicates inflexible reasoning and a lack of innovation on our part. When we deployed to the south, we thought about facing a colonial army in an unconsciously biased way, and it's taking its toll. This is a trap. This has to be a trap laid by the Republican Army. They tricked us, goddammit. The enemy isn't here. Where are they? That is obvious. They must have fulfilled the rule of forced concentration. They made efficient uses of the resources they had. They're probably sneering at our naive predictions this very minute, because the concentrated enemy forces are surely committed to the main battlefield. Battalion Commander to all companies. As of this moment, abort your missions. Gather up immediately. I say again, gather up immediately. As a commander engaged in a reconnaissance mission, Tanya knows exactly what this means. That's why she gave the order to contact headquarters right away. You haven't gotten through to HQ yet? But the apparatus picks up noise. The area around their headquarters is already under heavy signal jamming, so their signals are blocked outright. But they just barely manage to get a spotty connection. Tanya orders Serebryakov to explain the situation and tries to come up with countermeasures. What the fuck are we gonna do now? The problem is how to take care of things from here. Reality is that the enemy field army is gathered together. We can't expect interdiction missions like obstructing traffic or severing their supply lines to take effect before the enemy forces attack. And if their forces are concentrated, a simple comparison of fighting power shows that we are overwhelmed. Considering the progress of the battle, our options for supporting the main forces are limited too. After all, our corps have already advanced, lured by the honey of destroying the divided enemy troops. Armies can't stop very easily once they've started. Even if headquarters decided to retreat, the enemy wouldn't let them stop now. They'd follow close in pursuit. And if that happened, the communication lines would be severed before the main Imperial forces could even build resistance lines, and the Southern Front would go down in history as a major defeat. Even if they retreat to Taurus Naval Base without command of the sea, it will only be a matter of time before they have to surrender. Now, the important thing here is how I can run away without harming my military record. Right now, the important thing here is how I can run away without harming my military record. Beneath her disgruntled face, Major Tanya von Degrichov is deep in thought. If she doesn't want the Imperial Army to lose, she can't deny the possibility of going back to support the others. So for the moment, she seriously considers the idea, but she concludes that it is impossible. At this point, an Imperial victory is out of the question. We are up against an overwhelmingly superior force. If we can't take them out now, there's no chance of winning. And considering we are in the desert, the option of holding up in the temporary defensive position set up by the field engineer team and waiting for the situation to change is hopeless. In a desert, water is precious, probably as precious, if not more than gasoline. Probably as precious as gasoline, if not more. Maybe if we were near a water source, it would be different. But at any other position in the field, a couple days' siege is enough to have us writhing in thirst. So defending a fixed point where there is no water is dangerous. Too dangerous. Water. Without water, we can't fight a war, damn it. Shit. This is why I hate the fucking desert, Tanya gripes. But she doesn't stop thinking. Currently, it's impossible for the Imperial Army to face a large force in the desert. They don't have enough water. But if they retreat, the enemy will follow them forever. Even if they confront them, if they can't defeat them all, they'll run out of water and die of dehydration. It'd be a terrible irony to suffer from thirst at Taurus Naval Base with a clear view of the sea. No thanks. Under the circumstances, the measure they could take to contribute to an Imperial victory might as well be going and dying in a fight against the huge enemy army. No way am I taking on any suicidal mission like that. All right. In that case, the only thing to do is strike the enemy's water. So Tanya narrows down her choices on the realistic supporting move of striking the enemy's supply lines after all. There has to be some kind of military support, or all their friendly troops will be wiped out. And this should protect her military career as well. But she suddenly regrets this idea. Her battalion can take pride in being one of the best, but it's still just a single aerial mage battalion. Regardless of their abilities, they will be hopelessly outnumbered out there. Even if they were going to support the troops' withdrawal, it would be practically impossible by any orthodox method. And even the long-range penetration in de facto enemy airspace to strike their water transport lines is just unreasonable. And in terms of securing their own water too, the Imperial maps had almost no information about nearby oases. Should we bank on friendly contact with local nomads? If it doesn't work out, I'll be the one suffering from thirst. I'm definitely not interested in that either. Think, goddammit. What is the enemy's logic here? The enemy thinks they've tricked us. So what's the next logical step? In short, the Republican Army feigning a decentralized advance thinks the Imperial troops are concentrated. Oh, no, that's it. I see. The main forces certainly are concentrated. So how about we use their logic against them? As she mumbles, she continues her train of thought. And what if the enemy falls into the same bias that the Imperial Army was trapped in until moments ago? They think they have all our units pinned down. Naturally, she can expect that under that assumption, the enemy won't be paying much attention to the possibility of a powerful combat unit coming at them from behind. In a sense, it's a prospect stemming from a wish. But in this situation, her human psyche gives her hope. Good, she crows. But even if that hypothesis proves correct, she is still distressed about what her role will be in this matter. Certainly, it might be possible to cause some temporary confusion by jabbing them in the back, but can the battalion maintain that confusion? I'm not sure. Even if they can create a break in the encirclement, God only knows if they can keep it open. In other words, you can put as much faith in that plan as you can in that bastard being X. Actually, the more she thinks about it, the more dangerous it sounds. If they do manage to punch a hole, the army will no doubt order them to hold their ground in order to keep it open even an instant longer. Maybe I should just run away. But there's definitely a court-martial waiting for her if she chooses to do that. Fleeing before the enemy and, on top of that, abandoning the troops to do so. She's sure no one would protect her like they did when she screwed up off the coast of Norden. In that case, her fate would be getting sent to a silent firing squad, getting shot after being repatriated and court-martialed, or, if she was lucky, a messenger would deliver a pistol and tell her to commit suicide. Not many options, really. There aren't many ways to explain away fleeing before the enemy. No, you can try to gloss it over, but for better or worse, a soldier is expected to fight bravely to the bitter end. Anyone who takes a hike when their allies are in crisis is just like unlucky Admiral Bing. I don't know who Admiral Bing is, although if I had to venture a guess, he's probably a soldier or admiral from World War I. Incidentally, my high school was named after a Lord Bing, so that could well be the case. Although I don't know what makes him unlucky, if anything. I haven't looked into his military record. Anyway, continuing here. No officer wants the same fate as Admiral Bing, who failed to do his utmost, quote-unquote. Tanya has seen with her own eyes that there are officers in the field who would rather fight a reckless battle. Of course, she never dreamed she would be in this position herself. If she had official orders to leave, that would be a different story. But since it's common military sense in the present situation to rescue the main forces, surely von Rommel would give such an order. That fact can't be ignored. So then I should fight under the given conditions. All I can do is fight and find a way out of this up ahead. My top priorities are survival and self-preservation. Therefore, it is essential that I don't appear to have abandoned my fellow troops. So if possible, I'd like one result of my actions to be that they take as little damage as possible. Still, only as little as possible. If I can prove they took less damage because of me, then the reality that I helped save them will lessen the criticism I receive over my lack of motivation. Okay, so how can I uphold my reputation while minimizing damage to the troops in the field and also escaping to live another day? Looking back through history, you can see there is nothing more horrible than a fighting retreat. And in that case, even if you managed to survive, you didn't really defend what you were supposed to anyway.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Mao and his long march here when I think of that statement. Anyway, under the circumstances, it's too risky to ask the heavily encircled main forces to withdraw with minimal casualties. But there are examples in history where both conditions were met. For example, the Battle of Sekigahara. The results of the clash between Eastern and Western armies are famous, right? Betrayal, conspiracy, hesitation. In any case, there's a lot to learn there. The final days of the defeated enemy army were utterly miserable. Most of their territory was either seized or the meager kokudaka from its rice yields were gobbled up. In the first place, many of them failed to leave the battlefield. But there was a nearly crazy bunch who, despite participating in the battle, not only managed to get their general out, but also showed off their martial zeal. Their name? The Onishimazu. The Shimazu clan, eh? In other words, the logic is that if we ram through the enemy and then leave, we're not fleeing before the enemy. No, but Tanya feels somewhat conflicted. Let's be honest. She mentally complains that breaking through the enemy and making it back is mission impossible. I'm not sure if the guys who can casually pull feats that warranted special mention in history think Kellerman's charges are sane. This is a difficult era for a sensible person like me. But if I must, if I have no choice, then that's my duty. Okay, I wish they had more detailed editor's notes here. Who is Kellerman and what was his charge? And also, I'm very intrigued by this mention about the Battle of Sekigahara. Like, I've heard of it, and hell, I've been to Japan, so I've seen a lot of like castles and scenes of where battles happen and stuff like that, but I don't think I've had the pleasure of actually examining that particular field, assuming the location is still somewhat discernible in the present day relative to what it was then. In any case, continuing now here, we have a brief change of scenery. Early in the morning, October 13th, Unified Year 1925, Republican Army Camp. It seems we've won. Yes, General. The scene before their eyes was the Republicans' revenge on the Empire, something that most Republican soldiers had been dreaming of since the collapse of the Rhine front. He had lured the enemy with false reports of a decentralized advance. Now he had them encircled with his concentrated forces and was about to annihilate them utterly. They were going to do to the Empire exactly what had been done to them on the Rhine front, and the resulting pride invigorated not only the staff, but the troops as well. For General de Lugo, it was the first step in a counteroffensive for which he had prepared in every possible way. Of course, he was also relieved that the efforts he had put in so far were working so well. It had taken a long time, but if they could defeat the Imperial army here, they could reinforce their defense of the southern continent. They could take back Taurus and turn it into a strong, fortified stepping stone for a counteroffensive of the continent. A counteroffensive on the continent. It was all finally within reach, which was why the alarm going off grated so badly on his ears. Mayday from the 228th Mage Company. What's going on? That was basically the look on the radio operator's face as he delivered his report like a cry for help. The 12th Mage Battalion providing direct support for the right flank also requires urgent assistance. They say the enemy has almost broken through. The multiple dire reports from the right flank were added to the map with symbols showing the progress of the battle. Everyone looked at the new situation out of the corner of their eye and fell silent. They knew it meant the mage units on the right flank were just barely holding out. But they all hesitated. They could hardly believe it. Emergency alert from Division 7 Command. What seems to be a regiment-sized unit of enemy mages is attacking the right flank. What? We didn't have them encircled? Finally, the division headquarters had reported in about the enemy movements. The staff officers who had prepared a calmer notification, the staff officers would have prepared a calmer notification, but unfortunately such hopes were dashed.
The hoarsely delivered report from a high-ranking frontline officer said that they were being attacked by a regiment of enemy mages. It was such awful news that DeLugo wanted to shout. That's not funny. He thought he had them surrounded. Since the plan was to target the enemy flanks, the troops were trained specifically for counter-land attacks. The job of stopping the pesky enemy mages was the mission of his own mage forces concentrated in the center block. Each flank also had enough mages to stop a battalion's worth, just in case. But if their opponent had a regiment, that could mean that almost none of the Imperial mages on this battlefield had been surrounded. Oh, of all this stupid... Then who are the mages in the center fighting? But that's not consistent with the intel we have, goddammit. DeLugo fell silent and stared at the map. Their estimates of the enemy fighting force and the current actual scale of their mage units. There shouldn't have been such a severe discrepancy between them. It was true that his main mage force was engaged with what they believed was the main Imperial mage force. He had also received a report that due to their numerical superiority, they were maintaining the upper hand for now. So given the reports and the intel they had gotten ahead of time, there should have been no way the enemy had mages to spare. But DeLugo pondered for just a moment. If it were possible, well, it couldn't be, but do we only have numerical superiority because the enemy pulled a regiment of mages out of their forces? But that would mean they basically have a brigade's worth of mages in this battle. The possibility that our intel net missed that is greater than zero, but I'm confident in our grasp of enemy movements. The conclusion he had reached was that the Imperial army had a regiment at most. That should have been all the enemy had to work with. It shouldn't have been possible for reserves to crawl out of the woodwork like this, and yet here they were. Confirm if it's really a regiment. So the composed part of his mind doubted whether it was really a regiment. For example, maybe they were using some kind of deception to fool them into thinking the group was regiment-sized. Or the confusion could have caused a misunderstanding. But then, what about all the reports from his frontline units? He knew what they meant. Whether he could accept it or not was another problem. General DeLugo, we've already lost 2 companies, sir. And most importantly, the dazed look on the staffers' faces spoke volumes. DeLugo understood their disbelief and bewilderment quite well, though he couldn't show it. The fact that 2 companies had been taken down meant that there was an enemy force out there big enough to overwhelm them in an instant. It would be different if they had to put up resistance and It would be different if they had put up resistance and been defeated. But if the enemy was stronger by the standard margin, the first message from a unit making contact would never have been Mayday. If the 12th Battalion is about to be breached, the enemy force must be at least twice the size of that. And on top of that, there was the report like a shriek from the battalion assigned as direct support. If they were almost broken as well, the delaying defense along the entire right flank wasn't functioning as intended. Are you telling me there's an enemy mage unit so powerful we can't stop them, even if we get support from the right flank division? Ugh! Send the mages from the center over as backup. At this rate, they'll break the encirclement. DeLugo's brain had fallen into worry on this outrageous turn of events, but Colonel Vianto's shout rebooted it. Vianto had recovered fastest of all the momentarily paralyzed staff officers. Though they were behind, the others started to understand what needed to be done. If the batteries on the right flank were hit, there would be no way to stop the enemy from leaving, so the right flank needed reinforcements. It was an utterly sensible plan, but there was nothing sensible about their opponents. It happened the moment the unit was pulled and sent over. 5th Mage Battalion to headquarters. The enemy mages are rapidly approaching. The warning scream was from the mage unit directly supporting not the right flank, but the center block. Ridiculous! They're not striking the batteries? He had just sent the 2nd Mage Battalion and the newly pulled 1st Composite Mage Regiment over to the right flank. But he was forced to realize, with utter loathing, that the enemy mages who had been running amok on the right flank had changed course. The maneuver wasn't even aiming to stop the reinforcements. For a moment, no one was sure where the enemy was headed. It wasn't a move to destroy the right flank's encirclement, which had seemed to be on its last legs. No, and it wasn't even a move to intercept the incoming backup. It was a charge at the Central Republican forces. They're like devils. The truth came out of Vianto's mouth as a complaint. Vianto was more familiar with mages than anyone else present, and he understood intimately the enemy's intentions. Or maybe it was more that he knew from experience what they would target next. Striking the right flank was just one of their objectives. If the Republican army had left them to their own devices, they would have broken through the right flank and left. But what do they do if the Republican army does the sensible thing and reinforces the right flank? Simple. They strike where units have just been removed, the center. It wasn't as if units could be taken from the left to go all the way onto the right. To check enemy mages on the right, units would be taken from the center. Supposing the mages charged in a straight line, the noise and jamming would be such that their ability to detect enemies would be temporarily paralyzed. Then, if the Imperial army moves based on the sign of reinforcements on the way, that moment, Vianto instinctively understood the horrible truth, and his spine froze. The mages were finally protecting the right flank. The exact instant they finished fanning out, they became useless. They couldn't contribute a single thing at the decisive moment the center was being attacked. No, we made them useless. The enemy maneuvers appeared to be the meanderings of a cornered group, but in fact, they were more devilish than the devil himself, using tactics that were the height of cunning and extremely devious. The enemy mages were pulling off maneuvers Vianto wasn't even sure were theoretically possible. He thought he was well versed in the terrors of the Imperial mages. "General DeLugo, please fall back, sir." "What?" "The enemy is coming here. Damn it. They mean to recreate what they did on the Rhine front." They would take out the headquarters with a surgical strike. Anyone would laugh it off as a bad dream, but the Empire had executed it on the Rhine lines once before. They broke through the Republican main lines positions to have incomparably tight. They broke through the Republican main lines positions built to have incomparably tight defenses and took out the fortress-like headquarters in a single stroke. The panic that overtook the front-line units at the time was on a practically indescribable scale, and the current Republican army didn't have a substitute for DeLugo. It had just exchanged its old wineskin for a new one. It didn't have another ready. The Free Republican Army, as one could tell just from the name, had taken enormous efforts to achieve. So if the general at the head of the Republic fell now, of all times, continuing an organized resistance would be nearly impossible. To the Imperial Army, even if its entire Southern Expeditionary Corps got wiped out, if they managed to take DeLugo with them, it would still be a great victory. No, it'll be hard to take out the Imperial Army now. They'll probably just get a little beat up. And what will happen to our firepower and units if we send them out to face those mages? At the very least, we won't achieve our initial objectives. Men, protect the general. This is our final battle. The enemy broke through on the Rhine, but here, Vianto could not let that happen. He wouldn't give the Imperial Army another headquarters. The same day, Imperial Army camp. Hearing that laugh, the unlucky non-commissioned officers who were also in the armored vehicle grimaced. Well, actually, let me redo that laugh. That sounds better. Hearing that laugh, the unlucky non-commissioned officers who were also in the armored vehicle grimaced. Well, anyone has the right to grimace if their high-ranking commander bursts out laughing maniacally when they're surrounded. If he's gone insane, this is gonna suck. There was nothing terribly strange about their feelings. Normally, Rommel would have been considerate and held his laughter in, But for today, he just laughed and laughed, more than you would think a rational person could. "Ah, this is truly amusing. Way to go, Major." Just this once, Rommel couldn't stop laughing. The scene before his eyes had made a tremendous impact that warranted the reaction. He thought he could control her somewhat on a leash, but actually, she was much more effective when he let her go. She must have caught a whiff of something. That's why she wanted to go on recon so late. He was grateful that she had seen through the enemy's ruse and alerted him the Republicans were on their way before the main forces encountered them. Thanks to that, he was able to prepare to face a superior enemy. At the same time, if there were units outside the encirclement, you'd think they would aim to withdraw. But he felt stupid about thinking that when he saw what was coming. Is she retreating forward? I have to laugh. Major von Degrachoff's maneuvers are incredible. He had been puzzled when he heard the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion's engagement of the enemy. He had been puzzled when he heard the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion was engaging the enemy's right flank. How much will it really do when their encirclement is almost complete? At that moment, he had resigned himself to losing the entire army. He figured the 203rd Battalion's efforts would only lengthen the time it would take to wipe them out, and had even been considering ways to withdraw. If we do everything we can, maybe some units can escape this encirclement, and if we're lucky, maybe we can sow the seeds of a defensive line reorganization. So it took him a minute to understand that Degrachoff had broken off combat and charged straight headlong into the center of the enemy's formations. He didn't realize it wasn't a charge of resignation and self-sacrifice until the confusion in the center of the Free Republican Army gradually spread and the enemy's movements grew sluggish. Directly after that, he finally got his answer as to her objective. Surprisingly, striking the right flank was a total diversion. Her real aim was the enemy's main force that he was facing with his troops, and her even bigger ulterior motive was to attack enemy command directly. That was her plan. She turned this fight around using maneuvers and securing local superiority. She was just like a magician. To an ally, she surely is an evil-crushing shield of white silver. But to headquarters, she's a mad dog indeed. Oh, she will achieve so much more off the leash. This had to be a headache for a proud general. A proud general wouldn't want to admit that someone of a lower rank, and a mere child soldier at that, was better than them at war. But who would? Ah, so that's why most generals can't figure out what to do with her. No one likes a hunting dog who's smarter than the hunter. She's too talented to be a mere field officer. Any superior officer would have a hard time with her as a subordinate. She might even be too much for me to handle. I understand very well now why the general staff, no, the entire Western Army group, gave her the authority to act independently. She's a frightfully competent hunting dog. Thanks to her shaking off enemy reinforcements and ripping through their headquarters, the enemy army was in a panic. The Imperial Army, supposedly surrounded by the remnants of the Republican Army, had managed to maintain an organized combat unit, and the situation was now such that it could make a breakthrough at long last. They were free to push forward or retreat at will. And in fact, since the flanks could no longer do much to the... since the flanks couldn't do much due to the confusion in the center, they could even resurrect their initial plan to take them all out in one fell swoop. We can do this, Rommel smiled ferociously. Hit the enemy's left flank, now. This is a mobile air attack. Hit them in their left flank and drive straight through their central forces. They would leave the disordered right flank alone for the moment, and the connecting unit in the center had fallen into disarray following Degrachoff's attack. Rommel saw immediately that the left flank was what remained. Though it was currently isolated from its chain of command, the left flank actually had the most organized fighting power left. He would attack it with not a moment to lose. In order to do that, he needed all the military strength they had. What should I do?
He started to wonder, but realized he didn't actually have enough troops to think that hard. The light division should defend our position. All the rest of you, get on the left flank. Crush that left flank, goddammit. Having decided to leave the greenest of his light divisions to hold down their position in the command post, he would take the rest of his forces to clash with the left flank in an attempt to bring down the encirclement and take out their enemies. If they did that, they would at least be able to secure a retreat. It would probably be possible to deal quite a blow if they hit them while they were already confused. That he had been able to make such a judgment so quickly was a testament to Rommel's unusual talent. At least, maintaining an orderly resistance while encircled was praiseworthy. Once he had a course of action, he moved quickly. Tell the Major she can do whatever she wants. And then, no one knew if it was for better or worse, but he let go of the leash. The Chihuahua on the other end was probably cute and lovable. But on the battlefield, he needed that wild hunting dog. And she could wreak way more havoc on the enemy. Oh, pardon me, it says Chihuahua. The Chihuahua on the other end was probably cute and lovable. But on the battlefield, he needed that wild hunting dog. And she could wreak way more havoc on the enemy if she and her battalion didn't conform to the norms. That was how it seemed to him, so he did it to reach his goals. Huh? Are you sure, sir? With that one, there's nothing better than to let her go do her thing. Hunting should be left up to the hunting dog, eh? When commanding a corps the same size as his enemies, Rommel himself had no intention of losing to anyone. He could probably even take on Degrachaff just fine if it ever came to it. He was fairly confident of his ability to wage maneuver warfare on the operational level. But he understood that when it came to running a battalion, he was inherently inferior. Or perhaps, more importantly, he had to accept that he would never be as good as her at sensing the time to fight. The opportunity she seized with her brisk maneuvering was such a brief instant that though I could see it from afar, I couldn't grasp it if I tried, myself. In any case, the more you try to control her, the more energy you waste. She and her battalion really are war's hunting dogs. They're cavalry officers of ancient times, the real deal. They know when, where, and how to go about charging in. They could take prey without you teaching them how. So rather than risk them forgetting how by training them, it was much more logical to let them run wild. More importantly, hurry up and get ready for a penetrating raid. Get on the Republican guns before they regain discipline. He could think about how to use Degrachaff and the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion later on. Right now, it was most important to take care of the immediate situation at hand. If we don't crush the Republican artillery, we'll be caught in a one-sided barrage soon enough. If I don't seize this chance, I'll be the most inept of the inepts. I have no interest in being mocked by history as an incompetent general who wasted the hard work of his fellow soldiers. Understood, sir. All right. Understood, sir. Right away. Praise be to the skirmishers and their crisp movements. Look how briskly they move, even under these trying circumstances. Those are veterans of the Rhine, all right. Even if their units are undermanned, they're more useful since they don't hesitate. A soldier who can move is better than one who can't. Once the light division acclimates, they'll be a bit more helpful. I'm glad they've at least been learning some fighting techniques. Gather all the remaining gunners together. I don't want to get caught round the back. As soon as you're done attacking the artillery, blast the hell out of the enemies in the center block. No limits this time on the amount of shells you can use. Just shoot them like crazy. If we're trying to keep them in check, do we really need that many? We can't bring the artillery on the charge. Plus, the light division staying to hold our current position needs backup. Now get going, damn it! But surely they couldn't be expected to defend on their own. They were liable to collapse if he left them surrounded and alone. That would affect all the units charging, too. Speed was paramount in a maneuver battle. In order to minimize the time the most vulnerable units would be exposed, he'd have to make soldiers run. At that point, they really couldn't take the artillery with them. Then, the only thing to do was have them put their firepower on display once they had taken up their position and leave the limbers lie. Artillery employed in a practical way can be useful for both the offense and defense, no doubt about it. Firing, distracting, defending, they do it all. If the troops left the guns as a trick up their sleeve, the defensive position could be defended while they fought the maneuver battle. There was hope. Yes, a path had opened before them. It's a race against time, men. Be quick. Gentlemen, move out. Put the armored unit out front. Sorry, sir. Right away, sir. The existence of a light at the end of the tunnel reinvigorated HQ. It was a brilliant transformation, as if their monochrome would suddenly have color again. And he, Rommel, was no exception. Though they were surrounded, Rommel was in high spirits. Strangely enough, it seemed like things would work out somehow in the end. With this operation and the tireless fighting of his subordinates, they would turn the tables, and the feeling was, man, this feels great. If God exists, if the gods exist, they sure work in mysterious ways. I can't make fun of the Major. It does feel good to turn the tables. All right, let's scare the living daylights out of them. What a surprise! What a surprise indeed. At Republican headquarters, the normally tranquil, albeit stuffy room was wrapped in an unusual atmosphere. The tense staffers were watching the two high-ranking officers in the middle of the room who had big, empty grins on their faces. One was their commander, General De Lugo. The other was the officer regarded as the toughest, most experienced veteran of them all, Colonel Vianto. Their most senior commander and the veteran they were supposed to be able to rely on burst out laughing maniacally. On a battlefield, there was no greater fear. When the two people who should have been their core cracked up under the pressure instead of coping with the crisis, the staffers wondered, have they gone insane? With a shudder, and their faces all twitched nervously. So for a short while, the staffers were faced with the grave dilemma of whether or not to call a medical officer. Paying no heed to the confusion around them, De Lugo and Vianto continued to laugh. What's so funny? As some of the staffers watched very, very closely, they realized the laugh was almost their way of saying, who cares? And that they too had no choice but to follow suit. And after the laughter had run its course, they spat, this really is a goddamn joke. That was their complaint against the absurd situation in which they found themselves. They had been completely confident their battle formation would lead to victory. It was a simple operation that required only sticking to theory. Apply pressure on the surrounded Imperial army from 3 directions, and drive them out. The Free Republican Army was structured in such a way that pre-battle forecasts indicated it could win against the Imperial Army. It had to be discussed in past tense. Did they seriously overturn our strategy with an operational level power move? They've got some balls. Now their plans had been completely obliterated in an instant, even though they hadn't made any mistakes on the strategic level. As a result of tactical maneuvers performed during operations, their strategic advantage was overcome. Theoretically, that shouldn't have been possible, but in reality, the situation they prepared for had been reversed. After attacking the right flank, the enemy regiment essentially traded places with the reinforcements sent to assault After attacking the right flank, the enemy regiment essentially traded places with the reinforcements to assault the central forces. The unit directly under Vianto was out intercepting, but surprisingly, the moment the enemies made contact, they began to retreat. Just like that, the Republicans couldn't stop them with their elite group, but neither could they reorganize a united resistance in time. If the enemy was coming at them on the offensive, some could pin them down and the main group could strike the rest of the Imperial forces. But if the enemy was retreating, then they had to attack. Naturally, that made the logic work in reverse. Still, they couldn't just leave them be. They had to do something. but in their situation, they didn't have many options to choose from. The disorder on the right flank was unbearable, and the left flank was in a furious battle against the main enemy force attempting their breakthrough. When the battle was going in such a direction, they couldn't permit a regiment of mages to do as they pleased. And then, they could hardly believe it still. The possibility had crossed everyone's mind, but they had dismissed it as unfeasible. The enemy mages had broken into multiple groups? They're pulling back around, and fast. They were all suddenly speechless. Why, of all the... Is this even possible? The scene was a vivid reminder of the gap in ability between the two sides. It's like they're playing tag with us. Just as the pair said it, it happened the instant Just as the pair had said, it happened the instant the intercepting party had I am rambling here. Just as the pair said, it happened the instant the intercepting party unhesitatingly gave pursuit. The Imperial forces smashed through as if they had been waiting for the slightest disruption in the lines. Since both sides were accelerating past each other, they should have been able to turn and fire. But they were going so fast it made combat difficult. Vianto's mages attacked anyway and barely grazed the enemy, but the Imperial mages nailed a handful of Republican mages in the running. Send out the reserve unit. Pincer the enemy with the intercepting unit. From a simple bird's-eye view of the shape of things, the charging Imperial forces were surrounded by several mages. At a glance, their encirclement and annihilation was only a matter of time. There were almost no gaps to escape through, and the Republican mage units were numerically superior as they closed in. But to someone actually in that fight, the situation looked totally different. The enemy ripped right through the surrounding mages. As if laughing at the Republicans' numerical advantage, the Imperial mages abruptly overwhelmed them with firepower and mobility. It was like a bad dream made real. Then, as if sneering at the Republicans' attempt to suppress them, they made a crazy beeline for DeLugo's headquarters. "It's no good, sir. They're too fast," someone cried. They were indeed too fast. Before the reserves could get in the air, before the pursuit unit could catch up, they had reached their target. They had charged all the way over there to eliminate a single person. But Vianto, at least, had been secretly preparing for this possibility. "I'm going to prevent a repeat of what happened on the Rhine front, no matter what it takes. Hurry and get the counter-mage defenses up. A direct hit is coming. Take shelter. HQ personnel, take shelter." Ignoring the uproar around them, Vianto started to shove DeLugo into a dugout. But when he sensed there wasn't enough time, he didn't hesitate. He promptly kicked DeLugo in and dove on top of him as a shield. The staffers who piled in immediately after him were lucky. Right as all of them knocked together in the dugout, boom! Someone shouted a warning in a quaking voice, and everyone went prone by conditioned response. The moment they instinctively, almost in a trance, ducked their heads, partially opened their mouths, and covered their ears, their eardrums endured a roaring blast. And what met their eyes when they looked up was the area HQ used to be, the aftermath of the mage's flyby. In addition to a smattering of anti-personnel explosion formulas, they had attacked with grenades and 50-kilo bombs. As those in the dugout looked on, the Imperial mages shook off the defending anti-air fire with ease and picked off pursuing Republican mages. The dogged pursuit continued, yet, despite these strenuous efforts of the defending mages, the enemy broke free as the Republican leaders watched from the dugout. Most of the staffers were stupefied by that brief moment. The enemy attacked and left, and they hadn't been able to do a damn thing about it. So those are Imperial mages. Those are the guys who raged across the Rhine front. The shock was so much that the vast majority of the staffers had frozen, but Vianto, one of the few exceptions, began taking stock of the damage. The headquarters itself had taken direct hits with mage formulas and was utterly destroyed. In that state, all its equipment had been ruined. Their only choice was to use the backup command post. I sure am glad we made a backup. Are you all right, General? By the protection of the Holy Mother! A little later, and we would have been in trouble. I never thought the day would come I'd be glad to have a subordinate who would kick me in the shins without hesitating. Most importantly, the general was alive and well. Luckily, it should probably be said, DeLugo escaped with only bruises from when he dove, or rather was kicked, into the dugout. No one blamed Vianto for them, though, under the circumstances, because he had averted catastrophe. Still, even if their courage was feigned, they were calm enough to joke about it, good-naturedly. Vianto determined that they had dodged the worst-case scenario. He remembered the crisis of defeat, the shock at hearing their headquarters on the Rhine front had been blown away. They couldn't let that happen again. Still, when he noticed DeLugo had his eyes squeezed shut like he was praying, he wasn't surprised. He had been terrified himself. After all, the Republican army had nearly been decapitated yet again. On the Rhine, their response had been delayed because it was new to them, but this time they narrowly escaped making the same mistake twice. It was probably due to protection from God. He thought of the future of the fatherland, the pride of the Republic that would be passed on, their determination to maintain that radiant glory, even if it was just an afterglow, was just barely getting them through this crisis. What's the damage? Things are a mess, but we can still manage to call it minimal. Shall we withdraw? They could still fight. At least, they could still crush them in the next round. This was the southern continent, not the Empire's home base, but the territory of the Republic and Commonwealth. Our odds in a long-drawn fight aren't bad. In that case, it's probably best to conserve our troops and go back to wearing down the enemy. With those thoughts, DeLugo decided to minimize their losses and withdraw. Yes, this time they had lost. He felt that. They got us. But as a strategist, he had already accepted it and put it behind him. There's nothing we can do about this. We retreat. We retreat and watch for our chance to make a comeback and strike again. Notify all units to withdraw. They are absolutely not to chase any further. We need to reposition ourselves. If a battle broke out, they wouldn't be able to win anyway, not at this juncture. So the answer was to simply not fight. They would lure the enemy into a battle of attrition and grind them down, day after day. The fact that they had survived was already a turning point. He and the Republic would not lose. All they had to do was to be standing on their 2 feet at the end of this war. In short, that was what victory was to the Republic. Did you see them, Major? The looks on those numbskulls' faces. I understand how you feel, sir, but you might want to watch what you say. In a truly rare occurrence, Major von Degerchaff is in a good mood. She laughs gleefully from her belly, like a child of her age, as she leads the battalion. When they're feeling good, even the most straight-laced person will crack a smile. Happily, the ability to feel genuinely joyful is the sign of a healthy mind. But they couldn't even provide you a proper escort. For how proud of their good taste they are, the escargots are awfully tactless. They're just too slow. That can't be helped. Of the Imperial Army's officially adopted computation orbs, the Type 97 gets both superior altitude and speed. In fact, it leaves the others in the dust. 8,000 is considered the maximum combat altitude for existing orbs, but that's practical for the Type 97. It's such a high-performance orb that if you work extra hard, you can approach 12. Naturally, it's the optimal type for the self-preservation first tactic of hitting and running. With outstanding altitude, speed, and climb rate, the Elenium Type 97, known officially as an assault computation orb, boasts performance equal to its name. The Type 95 is a hugely flawed machine, but the Type 97 I can use. Even Tanya is compelled to raise her hand to praise Elenium Arms for this one. She appreciates the safety and peace of mind the Type 97 gives so much that it's her trusty main orb. Although when she's really cornered, I have to ignore my myriad conflicts and tearfully relinquish that pillar of my being, the freedom of my mind. Life is really irreplaceable. That said, I don't have to face any extreme conflicts like that this time. You don't have to be Tanya to be happy about getting through something without having to make any tough decisions. Well, it's no wonder. Trends move fast in the Empire, especially if you're a Republican soldier holed up in the colonies. So even Tanya is in a jocular mood, though it's not in her character. It's so wonderful to be free of that curse that makes me sing songs praising God or whatever. In any case, let's drink to the Elenium Type 97. Now and then, Elenium Arms does a decent job, after all. Here, here. Thanks to this thing, that duck hunt was a hell of a lot easier. If you focus on the outline, it looks like my battalion had a tough fight. We can even boast that we gave the enemy a good run for their money, basically on our own. 1 battalion. Augmented, yes, but still 1 battalion nonetheless. Punched through the encirclement, trapping friendly forces. With the enemy reinforcements at our mercy, we lured in the main forces and stopped them in their tracks. Then we turned back to attack and even did an anti-surface strike on their headquarters. If you add some rhetorical flourishes to our running around trying to escape and achieving 0 actual war gains, that is what you get. Someone from the Imperial Japanese Army might have said something like, quote, "My spirited unit delivered a bold blow to the enemy's main forces unscathed, as was our mission, and now we're pulling back," end quote. I figured it would be bad to only avoid the enemy, so we did that anti-surface strike at the end in order to have some action to point to. Perfect. Well, there were some newbie amateurs who seemed to think they were mages because they flew now and again, so I was able to rack up some kill points. Honestly, though, I'm not even sure if I should add them to my score. It is a pretty big tally already. It's tricky because if you count little chicks only capable of flying, people think worse of you. The way the Empire assesses kills is quite strict. So even if you don't mean to pad your count, it's better to avoid anything that could look like you might be. Even if I hunted these guys by the dozens, talking big about that when they don't even compare to the enemies we faced on the Rhine will only make my colleagues ridicule me all the more. I can't stand it when they say stuff like, "You want to brag about your hunting numbers that bad?" If I count them, I'm sure people will be talking behind my back. How desperate for kills can you get? But then Tanya has an idea. We'll have to mark down that this was a turkey shoot. Yeah, you're right. We can't make misleading reports, after all. That's right. Didn't they say the same thing in World War II? That a score against the Ruskies on the Eastern Front was totally different from a score against the Americans or British on the Western Front? This enemy sure is persistent, though. It seems they're still in hot pursuit. I don't want to mess up my record, she thinks. But when she turns around to look, the enemies seem rearing to go. She thinks for a minute, but who knows what these creeps will do if she lets them follow her home. What a pain. What's more, it seems like the units coming after us know what they're doing. It's also aggravating that we can't shake them off even though we're nearing maximum acceleration. I would propose a law against stalkers, but such regulation wouldn't apply on a battlefield anyhow. So I guess we'll just have to... I would propose a law against stalkers, but such wouldn't apply on a battlefield anyhow. So I guess you just have to save yourself. All right, let's play with them. Gentlemen, Serbino Buse. Entertain our guests. What the hell is a Serbino Buse? I want to ambush these creeps so we can get away. We're already in pseudo-Shimazu mode, so it's not a bad idea to take a page from their book here. They are the ones who are pursuing us. I would much prefer the civilized method of having a peaceful conversation. Tanya grumbles in her head. Once the enemy charges you, however, you're left with no other option but to slaughter them to the last man. Am I right?
Yeah! Let's give them an avalanche of cuddles. What the fuck? I'm gonna reread that. Yar! Let's give them an avalanche of cuddles. That has to be a bad translation. What the hell? In any case, aside from that very campy line, let's continue here. And her subordinate's response to her order is just as lively as she expected. The troops are thirsty for battle, which is great.
That means she won't have any trouble getting volunteers to play the terribly difficult yet fun role of the bait. Numbskull Imperial soldiers fleeing in a rout. Well, it just means they're the nasty type who like teasing sick puppies. Ferry 01 to 02 and 05. You guys are the bait. Position yourselves in the rear. When those clowns attack, pretend to collapse into disarray and flee. First, she has 2 companies pretend to be the rear guard. The point is to get the enemy's attention. An enemy that is rearing to fight is often like an enraged bull charging at a red cape. Her subordinates aren't red, but I've heard a bull will charge at just about anything waving in front of them. So to borrow from that example, they will pretend they can't stand up to the enemy's attack and beat a disorderly retreat. She'll have 2 companies be the waving cape and get chased while the other units pretend to flee before the enemy and get some distance in. Feigning that they've lost the will to fight, they scatter to either side. Then all they have to do is wait at the optimal location and lure in those numbskulls who only know how to charge. The rest of you split up. After luring the enemy into airspace D3, we're going to attack from 3 sides. The moment the 2 bait companies lead the enemy into D3, the rest of the units, who were supposedly fleeing in chaos, will come back around and launch an attack. Then they'll all form a cone shape and cross their lines of fire, taking care not to hit one another. The moment that formation comes together, the enemy will be like a rat in a trap. Okay, gentlemen, time to give these goobs some learning, eh? Tanya crows that they'll teach them that being surrounded is just as terrible in the sky as it is on the ground. Sadly, whether or not they'll be able to use what they've learned is a matter for another dimension. And when the Imperial mages fire an improbable amount of formulas into their narrow airspace, the Republicans who so enthusiastically pursued them expire and fall one after the other. You don't have to be Tanya to recognize this is a morale-boosting, extremely smooth victory. Plus, Major Tanya von Digrichoff gets to pad her score, and it doesn't even take that much effort. It's a wonderful job that results in easy, dramatic gains. I can't stop laughing. Which is why, in a rare occurrence, she is able to be cheerful, so cheerful she even chuckles and cackles gleefully. She nearly says it would be great if it could stay this easy from now on, but she freezes when she realizes the implication of her words. Yes, the words, from now on. From now on, eh? This is what it means to be so happy you wrap back around to sad. Her thoughts stop for a moment, and then a terrifying premonition of the future sends chills down her spine. After regaining her composure, Tanya objectively recalls the situation she's in. Then, after thinking a moment, she shakes her head with an openly bitter expression on her face. Certainly, we are winning easily at present. Even just now, they've downed Republican majors like it was a turkey shoot. But war isn't usually like this. Having it this easy will ruin you in the long run. Taking out enemy rabble certainly makes for a straightforward victory, but it would be a mistake to expect all battles to be like this. Even before that, if we have such an advantage, shouldn't we be taking action to end the war? Tanya suddenly wonders why they are still fighting, and groans unconsciously. Without even noticing First Lieutenant Weiss's questioning look, she sinks deep into thought as the unit returns to base. After mulling things over for a while, she is forced to acknowledge a shocking reality. When they land back at their desert base, she drops off her gear and dismisses the troops. Sipping a cup of cold water from the tank with an absent-minded expression, she looks out at the endless train of Imperial military vehicles coming and going across the desert. Supplies from the home country and transport trucks. All those things fight a desperate battle against the sand to assist in their victory here. She isn't sure who came up with the idea, but they've wisely used camels instead of horses to carry some of the cargo, which probably increases efficiency to a point. So their hard work is paying off. For now, things are fine. Their only enemies are the Republican remnants, who are hardly a formidable threat, and the Commonwealth's expeditionary forces. Regardless of numbers, the Imperial Army has them beat in terms of training, so any fight is a guaranteed turkey shoot. Conversely, though, we're wasting our vehicles on this pathetic enemy and putting serious strain on our nation's supply lines. Certainly, in terms of General von Zetour's idea of a purely political deployment to put pressure on the Republic and expand our influence on the Kingdom of Ildoa, a southern continent expeditionary force is one answer. But that... The words on the tip of her tongue, but she can't get them out, and she sighs. I'm going to reread that. But that... The words are on the tip of her tongue, but she can't get them out, and she sighs. Both Lieutenant General von Rudersdorf's plan to wipe out the Republican Army remnants and Lieutenant General von Zetour's political plan are choices that assume the number of major players in the war doesn't rise. They have made an expeditionary force a reality using every means possible in spite of the trying situation in the rear and the limited forces they could afford to muster. Tanya is compelled to worry. Considering the financial situation of the nation, perhaps this plan takes us too far out of our way on thin ice. There should have been any number of ways to go. The High Seas Fleet could have taken a make-or-break attitude towards taking command of the sea from the Commonwealth. Even if both navies ended up destroyed in the end, they could have established a puppet government in the Republic and made peace. But so far as Tanya can tell, the Imperial fleet is resorting to the fleet-in-being strategy of avoiding military risks and conserving its strength. While she can't deny that strategy has its logic, it's definitely not one that will defeat their enemies. Which is why she's ended up deployed on the inessential Republican colonies on the southern continent in order to pursue and destroy the remnants of the Republican Army. Even discounting the diplomatic thoughtfulness vis-a-vis the Kingdom of Ildoa, it is still putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. The Empire might as well be idly radiating its superior fighting capabilities. In these separate small-scale battles, the Imperial generals won't lose. They're dominating on the tactical level. The General Staff is successfully managing mobility and deployment on the operational level, whether maneuver warfare or breaking through encirclement, as well as supply issues. Indeed, from a military standpoint, putting military and political pressure on the Republic remnants and the Commonwealth via the situation on the southern continent and planning to cooperate with Ildoa is not a grave error. But that is only from a purely military standpoint. Or Tanya has second thoughts and revises her conclusion. Maybe the General Staff is proposing policies from only a military standpoint from the start, and the rest they leave up to the government, not wanting to step on the administration's toes. But if that is the case, Tanya has to bury her head in her hands. Okay, we have here on the page 209, page 269, opposite page 268, a picture here of Tanya sort of puzzling in thought, with her right hand up to her chin, stroking it, as if she had a beard. And she's kind of thinking to herself about what the hell is going on. Meanwhile, we can see Serebriakov and some of the troops in the back kind of mulling about and chatting. And Serebriakov appears to have a sheet of paper in her hands, for whatever reason. Next page. Page 270. What good will it do to expand the front any more than this? What does the Empire possibly gain by taking former Republican colonies in a desert? Has the will to fight any enemy you find on the battlefield spread to the politicians in the rear, who are supposed to maintain their calm and thinking
mode of operation about strategy? As she follows this train of thought, she trembles at her horrible vision of the future. Then how? How are the politicians at home going to end the war? She murmurs it to herself, but that one sentiment gives her a dreadful chill, like a curse. Are the Imperial politicians even capable of ending the war? We, the Imperial Army, are winning in the field. We also have the initiative. That's why we're enjoying such good times right now. Yes, both politically and militarily, this is our finest hour. So if this is really our finest hour, then what a waste, she laments. It's our finest hour, but the Empire is still hemorrhaging its national power in a war that has no end in sight. November 1st, Unified Year, 1925. Commonwealth, House of Commons. Subjects of the Commonwealth, today I inform you that the day approaches when the Empire, that dreadful military nation, brings its power to bear on us. The voice of the Prime Minister speaking to all the Commonwealth's people over the radio conveyed their harsh reality. And unfortunately, I must also inform you that they mean to attack. But allow me to say this. I hope it will be of some small consolation that I promise you, on behalf of the Commonwealth, it will be impossible for them to come by sea. Contrary to the content of his speech, however, his tone contained a hint of humor. But even our wooden walls, praised since long ago, would find the evil enemy we currently face a significant trial. War is no longer what it used to be. So he spoke, touching on the way war had changed in recent years. At this point, we must frankly acknowledge, without losing heart, that we are entering a terrible new age. Everyone listening carefully understood that he meant it would be a hard fight. This war will be harsh, and it will demand lengthy endurance. We will probably have to fight until either we or our enemy collapse. And it will be a fight that takes every last bit of strength our fatherland has. Along with his predictions, he made a declaration. But I promise my beloved fatherland this. Each and every word was crystal clear. Someday, we will destroy them. Someone in a pub shouted, "You bet your ass we will!" And multiple people nodded in agreement. Hear, hear. But for now, I simply hope that the Commonwealth in 1,000 years' time from today, our children's grandchildren will read in a history book written by one of us that now, this moment, was the best and finest of times for the Empire. That was the history it was their duty to create. For us, it is truly the worst of times, dismal even, it should be said. At the same time, for the Empire, it is the best of times. He was even arrogantly confident that they would exist in perpetuity 1,000 years on. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, a toast to our worst of times. And don't we want our grandchildren to say it? Don't we want them to say these times were the Empire's best? To now, our eternal fatherland's worst of times, cheers. The Saga of Tanya the Evil, Volume 3, The Finest Hour, Fini. So this ends Volume 3, The Saga of Tanya the Evil, The Finest Hour. Now then, we have, of course, the appendixes and a brief note from the author himself. But I must admit, I have thoroughly enjoyed this book in its entirety thus far, and I have to admit as well, with the forthcoming movie that's premiering later this year, I have to presume that that will contain, in no small part, the remainder of this book after the current ending point of the TV series, and perhaps extend further. Such as it is, I suspect it will just finish adapting the remainder of this book, and then we'll have to wait on Season 2 for the remainder, insofar as Volume 4 is concerned. But enough of that for now. Here we have the appendixes. Mapped outline of history. Achtung, attention.
one and all. Here on page 274, mapped outline of history. Panel 1, Year 3, Part 1. Operation Revolving Door leads to belated Commonwealth interference. 1. The Commonwealth begins engaging in diplomatic interference. Aware that war could break out, it positions its fleet in preparation for such an eventuality. 2. The Imperial Army carries out Operation Shock and Awe, or Schrecken und Ehrfurcht, if memory serves. 3. The 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion's Select Company employs tunneling tactics. 4. Operation Revolving Door begins. And you can see here those points demonstrated on the map above. Next, Panel 2, Year 3, Part 2. The Republican capital falls. The Commonwealth joins the war, but due to very mistaken assumptions, the mobilization of its land army is delayed. 2. The main forces of the Republican army surrender. 3. The Imperial army advances into the Republican capital. 4. DeLugo launches an emergency escape plan created in case the mainland was lost. 5. The 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion attempts to resist orders right before the ceasefire is declared. 6. The Republican fleet begins its escape to the colonies on the southern continent. 7. The Empire begins analyzing the situation with the goal of ending the war. Next panel, Panel 3, Year 3, Part 3. Lull leads to expedition to the southern continent. 1. The Empire sends troops with a primary objective of keeping the Republic in check and maintaining the pressure, but also out of consideration for its diplomatic relationship with the Kingdom of Ildoa, a political objective. 2. The Republic reorganizes. I'll reread that. 2. The Republic reorganizes its colonial army and sorties to defend the colonies. 3. The Imperial Army defeats the Republicans with mobile tactics. 4. The Bulldog speaks. Not sure what they're referencing with that. Bulldog, perhaps a reference to DeLugo. I couldn't speak to that. Or, oh, maybe they mean Desert Fox. Like, maybe they're calling him the Bulldog, so that could be Rommel. I don't know. All right, general commentary. The Imperial Army carried out bold operational-level maneuvers, such as tunneling and decapitation strikes in Operation Revolving Door, and won a decisive, historic victory. With its superiority on the purely military side, the Imperial Army immediately took the Republican capital. Since no one expected that to happen, the Commonwealth's intervention came too late to stop the Republic from losing its homeland. Amid concerns about the direction of the war, the Empire sent troops to the southern continent seeking to increase its gains. With the creation of a new front in the south and the Imperial Army's demonstration of their outstanding tactical maneuvers, the Republic and Commonwealth realize they are in for a bitter fight. As a result, all historians agree that this moment was the Empire's finest hour. So that concludes page 275. And when they say it's their finest hour, it's almost like they're implying that it's the achievement before the fall, the calm before the storm, the point at which everything began to turn downhill precipitously. And I'm not quite sure how to feel about that, but doubtless Carlo Zen has some interesting things in store for the coming volumes of this series, and I eagerly await that. Now, here on page 276, we have some notes on tunneling tactics. Tunneling tactics. Dig tunnels beneath enemy defensive structures and use explosives to blow them up. So here we have Section 1, Trenches. Holes for infantry to avoid shells and gunfire. In between them, we have no man's land, which is basically, as stated, no one can lay claim to it. It's an area between the two de facto border positions on the front. In the rear, here in panel 2, we see dig a tunnel that reaches the area below the enemy position. So yeah, you undermine the enemy's trenches, and you proceed to lay explosives, as listed in panel 3. 3. Plant massive explosives beneath the enemy position. Panel 4. Detonate it and destroy the enemy position. So we see here in panel 4, the bomb that has been laid in panel 3 detonates and sends everyone sky high and more or less kills everyone inside the trench. Oftentimes, this will collapse trench walls and cause earthquakes, even in areas not directly affected. All right, next page here. The revolving door tactic. Panel 1, we have here the sea on one side, which would be probably the strait between England and France. So anyway, we have here... Is that the Strait of Gibraltar? No, that's not. It's something else. I forget what it's called offhand. I really should remember that. I'm a little tired at the moment. Suffice it to say, you have the sea on one side, and you have the front line on the other, extending counterclockwise. Not counterclockwise. And sticking out from it, adjacent to. Not parallel, adjacent. And you have the German forces here marked in black, and you have the Republican forces, or French forces, if you feel so inclined as to call them as such, on the map here painted out in white. So in panel 1, as you see, you have the line. Panel 2, pull the front line back. Panel 3, lure the enemy in and advance on the other side, and therefore they've pinned them on all sides. They've got the sea at their back, and they have enemy forces on two sides, and so you have a triangle in which you can slowly squeeze them until they are basically wiped out, as listed in panel 4. Pincer and eliminate the enemy. Next page here, page 278. Summary of the Imperial Army's actions on the Rhine front. 1. The Imperial Army and the Republican Army face off on the Rhine front. So here, as you can see, German or Imperial forces marked in black, Republican or French army forces marked in white, one being listed as their main force, another being listed as a secondary force. 2. The Republican main forces move up their front line. The Imperial Army uses tunneling tactics to blow up the Republican forces from below. Headquarters neutralized by the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion. Point 3. The Republican Army is efficiently pincered using the revolving door tactic. Surrounded and with no supplies, the Republican Army surrenders, or, as the case may be, is slaughtered to the last man, because you can't have people around that you need to feed. I mean, come on. Realistically, if you have over 1 million prisoners, you can't afford to feed them. And if you look at history, that's just the way it was in World War II. Oftentimes, like the Soviets, after the fall of Berlin, they had tons and tons of German POWs. They sent basically frog marching off to Siberia, and almost none of them survived. In any case, continuing here, we now have the Afterword by the author, Mr. Carlo Zen himself. Afterword. To everyone who picked up Volume 3, long time no see. I'm terribly ashamed to have kept you waiting this long. And to the heroes here for the first time, who have purchased all 3 books at once, may you have a bright future on this side, quote-unquote. Anyhow, this is for a limited time only, but you can download an audio drama. An audio drama? Wow. Unless I'm constantly hallucinating without realizing it, you may already be enjoying that content now. And just a brief interlude here, there is indeed an audio drama, a version of this text in Japanese, which I have heard, and it has kind of butchered English subtitles attached to it. You can find it on YouTube. But in all truth, it's like, if I spoke Japanese, I would enjoy it, such as it is. Broken subtitles over Japanese audio with no visuals accompanying it, not really my cup of tea. I would say, in all honesty, that this thing I am presently recording would be superior to the Anglophone listener. So, I digress. Continuing here.
Surprisingly, it can be said that everything went according to schedule, per an announcement from General Headquarters. Last time, my productivity was hindered by that quote-unquote East Side Company, end quote, and their malicious interference in what Clausewitz would have called friction, quote-unquote. This time, with no such malicious interference, things went accordingly. Things went according to schedule, that is to say. Actually, I'm even ahead of schedule, aren't I? Even though it's fall, I'm writing this in my room with not my heater, but the AC or air conditioning on. This is not a lie. At the time of this writing, the temperature is a ridiculous 83 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but whatever. Allow me to explain. My manuscript and real life overlapped with each other, and it was an extremely bitter fight. Having gotten through it, I headed jauntily from the airport. Having gotten through it, I headed jauntily from the airfield and quietly boarded a plane to the United States of America. I was so proud of myself for successfully balancing my manuscript and real life that I was happy-go-lucky. Then, as I was chilling in the American South, suffering from the gastric strain of American-sized food portions, I saw news of a terrorist attack in Canada. What the heck? I reached for my tablet to check a news site when, I had a new email. I opened it with warm fuzzies, wondering who was concerned for my safety, and was shocked. It was an email telling me to write an afterword by X day. Oh my god. Breaking again from the text, I'm Canadian, and I kind of remember that particular event. I'll doubtless post up some little snippets here in the video portion accompanying this track, but we do occasionally have terrorist attacks in this country, unfortunately. It happens. And we are a fairly safe country, all told, but nonetheless, it's not unheard of in this modern day. Continuing here. So it is that I am coming to you, banging away on my keyboard thinking, it wasn't supposed to be this way, from where I'm staying in the southern United States. I imagine that by the time you get this volume in your hands, I'll be back on Japanese soil. Maybe. Humans are always falling into the same trap when it's accomplishing... Humans are always falling into the same trap when they accomplish something. I feel like I must have been taught the importance of vigilance, how the most dangerous moment is when you think you've defeated your enemy. In other words, this is what I get for forgetting the proverb, quote, one must tighten one's helmet strap even after a win, end quote. And so, I've realized that I need to reflect on the things I've done. For example, how about that wonderful beach scene I delivered as promised? Now, I feel nothing but regret for how ingratiating it was. Though it was a desire impaired to me by you, the readers, I am doing some serious gentlemanly reflection on whether I might not have been too true to desire and worldly passions. Wondering if I will be scolded, I am unable to face my conscience. This is a book for good citizens with an established reputation as a wholesome novel. So next time I'll try to portray things a bit more moralistically. I hope you'll forgive me for this volume's unscrupulousness. I am leaning towards giving you my word that I will deliver Volume 4 at blitzkrieg speed, at least compared to previous efforts. And I swear to you now, though it is only a personal promise, that I will make my decision as soon as possible. Last but not least, thanks to Tsubakiya Design, who did the great design, the proofers who worked with me on the obnoxious proofing, the team who combined their powers to make the audio drama, and many, many others. November 2014, from Carlo Zen. Okay, so that concludes all the pages of the text, the appendixes, and the note from the author at the very end. So, honestly, I've got to say, all told, damn, it's a good book.
And as I've said previously, just to reiterate, I'm very eager to see the forthcoming movie. Now, in terms of other projects and, collectibles, memorabilia, or what have you for this series that may be coming down the pipeline, I honestly couldn't say, being that this is simply a fan production. I know about as much, if not less, than the rest of you. Nonetheless, I have to admit, I want to, build a little collection of stuff for this series, and I don't know, just the idea of actually... I don't know, I'm a huge fan of this show, honestly, and the books, and I want to see more. I want to see more stories in this universe, and I want to know what the heck happens to Tanya, and I want to know if she wins. From the very beginning, I've known that Carlo Zen is probably not going to let Tanya win this, almost certainly. He's said that from the very beginning, but I still want to see this story come to fruition at the very end. I want to see where this goes. And I mean, on the subject of Carlo Zen, he seems, at least from this series, like a pretty chill guy based on the amount of stuff I've read in at least this series of his. I haven't read his other work. I do recall this rumor going around at one point that he might be an out-and-out Marxist, which I find very hard to believe, and I am very skeptical of. I'm inclined to believe, from the way he's writing, that he's probably ideologically in line with Tanya on a good many things, because, I mean, it's a mark of a really good writer if you're able to write a character that's believable, that has their own philosophy, but one which you disagree with diametrically and you're completely opposed to. If you're diametrically opposed to your main character's philosophy and beliefs, and you still make that person a compelling character that you can root for, that's bloody impressive. So, I don't know what his actual stances are on these issues, but I do know that insofar as writing good characters, I have to give him my seal of approval. Now, as to when Volume 4 will come out, I suspect that's coming out in about a month or two, at least the English translation thereof. So whenever that does finally arrive, I will doubtless be making an audiobook recording for that as well. Now, it's presently Thursday, November 15th, 2018, so, 4 years roughly since this book originally came out in its Japanese iteration. As to the English, I'll get to it as soon as it comes out and is translated. Give me a month, it'll come, not to worry. All right, and I suppose that basically summarizes my thoughts on the matter. Without further ado, I bid you all good night. Auf Wiedersehen.